The other world was such a place that existed between the human world and the spirit world. A small group of people approached a large tree from which many other trees were also sprouting. The girl next to whom the guy was standing said that this is here. The elven girl pointed at one of the trees and said that like this one, the other spirit trees had growth restrictions, so sometimes they needed to be cut down. She smiled at the boy and said she would leave it up to him. A young lad with a staff walked over to the tree rustling in the wind and asked the elder to count on him. The elfess smiled and thanked the iceman for his help. Ison extended his hand and addressed the mighty winds of the other world. With words, he wanted to borrow their power. The mighty winds listened to Ison's words, then he turned their power into his blade and cut a large tree. There was a cracking sound and the tree immediately tilted. Everyone present was delighted as the huge tree was cut with one swing and fell into the water. The children exclaimed to their teacher that it was simply amazing. The huge tree fell into the river and was carried away by the current. Ison looked at the children and said that they were all spirit children, so sooner or later they would be able to do that too. But before they learned a strong spell, they had to think about what effect it had. The children listened carefully to their teacher and agreed with him in everything. The headmistress thanked the boy for always instructing the children. But the hero replied that it was a simple compensation for them letting him stay here. He didn't see it as a problem and asked them to call him anytime they needed his help. A guy named Isenatisu Prahit was the main character, and had been living in this world for 20 years. The hero went to the house where he saw a girl sweeping on the porch and told Rinna that he was back. The girl named Rin was a descendant of a long-lived race of elves. She was glad when teacher Ison came home and greeted him. She said that he had received a letter again. Rin was currently living with Ison as his student. Ison wanted to tell the girl that there was one thing he had to tell her. Rin was surprised when her teacher told her that he was going on a trip. She thought that the Ison teacher had something wrong, since he was going to do it so unexpectedly. The boy replied that it had been 20 years since the demon blade had been defeated. He had been summoned to this world to help them. But he was already feeling better, so the elf girl could see for herself. Ison opened the doors and told Rinna with a smile that they were already here. On the table in front of them was a mountain of different letters. The girl was surprised that Ison could read this whole mountain of letters, and the guy confirmed it. They were all letters from his old students, and getting them here was quite difficult. Since he had been drafted, each of them had sent him a letter every month. The girl remembered how once Ison had asked her to read them, and those letters only spoke of good news. Rin smiled and wished she could read them again. Ison went to the window and the girl sat down on the sofa and took one of the letters in her hands. Most of the teacher's students grew up and found jobs. They were also known as the 100 Heroes. Many of them became sages, rulers, and commanders-in-chief, from directors of the best magic academies to rulers of huge empires. And inside, hundreds of letters from geniuses, like children waiting for praise from their father. They were happy to tell him about their achievements. The students told of lands, inhabitants, or discoveries they had independently discovered and explored, along with recommendations of where to go. Ison sat down at the table and said that they wanted to show him the beauty of the world. For that reason, he wanted to go to the human world and see everything with his own eyes. But the problem is that all his students live in a variety of places. If they found out that he would go to the human world, they might disturb a huge number of innocent people, which would put him in an uncomfortable position. So the hero decided that he would travel on his own, exploring new places. And if they meet, a normal greeting would be enough. The girl understood everything and suggested that their trip would be kept secret for everyone, and Ison confirmed Rin's words. And to put it simply, the teacher wished to return to the human world, which pleased the student. Ison agreed with her and said that after all he already had experience. He had already been able to recover from 20 years of prostrating himself. Ison stood up from his chair and pointed his hand towards the letters. He asked them to hear his call. On his coming journey, he asked for a better road to guide him, and the letters flew into the air. They glowed with a bright light. This was the magic of the prophet, and with his understanding of the magic words, Ison could control everything in the world. Among the pile of letters, the hero asked the letter that suited him to stand before him. One of the letters immediately flew up to the protagonist, who wanted to know which twisted road he should take. Ison took the letter that flew out in his hand and said that his journey begins from now on. He also told Rinna that she was now free to go wherever she wanted to go. The girl smiled and asked for permission to go along with her teacher. Guy checked with Rin to see how much longer she would be packing. The girl behind the doors replied that it was almost done and there was just a little bit left. She stormed out of the room and apologized for keeping him waiting. Rin turned her back and showed the hero her packed backpack. The girl was thrilled when she noticed that teacher Ison was wearing his old equipment. The guy smiled and replied to Rinna that apparently she was well prepared too. When they left the house, the hero once again clarified that she really wanted to go along with him. Besides, he had already said that his students were not supposed to accompany him. But the girl replied that it wasn't because she was his student, because Rin just wanted to take care of him. She wanted to do it as she did before. Besides, he said that she was free to do whatever she wanted and hoped that Isen was okay with that. Isen smiled and said that if she went along with him, it would even be easier for him, so he was only happy about it. Rin rejoiced and exclaimed that it was wonderful. She confessed that she had been preparing for this day for a long time. Isen grinned and said that he expected something like this from her. He went out into the field and warned Rin that he would be summoning the Gate of Light. The hero stretched his arm forward and used his power. A bright light flashed before them, from which a bright gate appeared. The girl was delighted and said that it had been 20 years since he had last passed between worlds, and Isen agreed with her. The hero admitted that he was more excited than he expected. The guy paid attention to a female figure that appeared not far from the nearest tree. It was the headwoman who made sure that the guys in front of her were indeed the guys. She wanted to make sure that the Isen was really leaving them. The hero greeted the elder spirit and the headman chuckled. Ryan thanked the girl for taking care of them. Isen replied to the headman that his students had already tried to contact him many times and he thought it was time to leave. He did appreciate her letting them stay in this world. The elfess smiled and admitted that it brought back memories for her of the time when he had first arrived on their world. She looked at the smiling young man who hadn't changed a bit in those 20 years. Perhaps it was due to the way time flowed in this world, but it had slowed down the aging of his body considerably. Therefore, Isen hadn't changed much in the past 20 years. As he said goodbye, he thanked the elder spirit for everything she had done for them. But the girl asked her not to thank her. After all, she was also responsible for the events with the demonic blade. Besides, he had taken good care of her children. She looked back at the little souls that also appeared by the tree. The children rushed into their teacher's arms and thanked him for everything. Isen was happy to meet the children who had come to say goodbye to him. The head teacher replied that if he needed anything in this world, he could always contact her, and those little spirits would be much stronger by their next meeting. The boy shook hands with the headman and said that when the time came, he would definitely contact her. In parting, the children wished good luck to the teacher and said goodbye to Ryan. The glittering gate began to open and the heroes waved to the children. They asked them to take care and said that they would see each other again. The teacher reminded Rina that they were keeping their return a secret, so they had to go around the world together. The girl looked at the teacher and agreed with him with a smile. After that, the protagonists entered the gate and dissolved. At this time, something interesting was going on in the heart of the city of Riga. The old man with the crown on his head was finally happy with their results. The king looked at a group of people who were muttering something and were focused on some kind of ritual. Each of them had a magic ball in their hands. Legends said that there was once a man called a prophet. He possessed the power to overpower the demonic blade of a trusted companion of the dark god. The old man exclaimed that after all these years they had achieved their goal with the prophet. He asked for the people's attention and exclaimed that they had finally gotten results. The overjoyed but tired people wanted to see if this was really true, and the king said that now they could all rest. The king left the room and thought that the monthly spending of materials on the ritual had finally paid off. Even with assistants and aides, he was still far from supreme mastery. The old man smiled and thought that he had finally returned. The king's name was Duke Dario. He was one of Isen's disciples and the current ruler of this kingdom. He ordered all the soldiers to announce his orders and to find the man who called himself a prophet. Duke didn't know where or when. He couldn't even be sure if it was his teacher, but everything pointed to it being an Iceman. It was a prophet, and also so powerful. The king was sure that there was no one like it except for Iceness. Many years ago he had been instructed by Isen and still believed that all his accomplishments were because of him. Duke's eyes lit up and he exclaimed that he would make every effort to find his teacher, and then he would get what he deserved. Among all the students, he was perhaps one of the most devoted. At the same time, a shining gate appeared somewhere in the middle of the forest, from which the protagonists emerged. On the elevated ground, the hero noticed that they were apparently near the pioneer city and rejoiced at this. Ryan replied that he was right. People talked about this town standing there a long time ago, and she had heard that things had changed there. They mentioned it in their letters, which is why Isen knew a little about this world. The hero was also thrilled that Ryan had memorized it all. The girl pointed her finger at her head and boasted that their race had a great memory. Ryan was also proud that she had memorized all the letters that the hero had let her read, so that if he was interested in something, he could always ask something from her. Isen knew that these forests had already recovered, but seeing it with his own eyes was even better. To begin with, he suggested that Rina go to the nearest town. There were a few other places he wanted to visit that interested Rin. She looked at Isen with interest and agreed with him. She wanted to ask him something and Isen turned his head to Rin. The girl wondered the reason why the book in his staff was glowing. The hero seemed as if he only just now remembered it. He tilted his staff toward her and suggested that she had apparently felt some of his sealed power. Rin was surprised to hear about Isen's sealed power. The hero swung his staff, which left behind a trail of light. Isen explained to Rina that the staff was reacting for the reason that they were moving in the right direction. 20 years ago, he fought against the demonic sword and defeated it. But he ended up on the brink of life and death and lost the ability to control his powers. Therefore, he sealed most of his power in various places. It was for this reason that they came to a certain tree in the forest that was wrapped in vines. The hero leaned his staff against the tree and the vines glowed with a bright light. The girl was surprised when the light from the tree began to form into a blob of energy. Ryan called out to Sensei in panic and didn't realize what was happening. But the guy looked at his student and calmed her down. The blob of light turned into a paper that had a confirmation condition on it to break the seal. The book that was in the middle of the hero's staff opened. The confirmation sheet flew into the pages of the book and the book immediately slammed shut. The girl assumed that her teacher had now gotten his powers back. Isen flipped through his book and confirmed it. One could make sure of it if one read the last page carefully. The last pages of the book said that the extraction had been completed and he had obtained the power enhancement skill. Isen smiled and assumed that all his powers had now returned back. Ryan was thrilled that her teacher Isen was now stronger than before. The hero laughed and said that he had become even stronger. He thought that the power enhancement skill only improved part of his abilities, but not completely. Rin assumed that Sensei had planned his trip to bring back all of his powers, but that was not the case. The hero replied that it was a mere coincidence that they ended up here. His ultimate goal was to visit all of his students. He just had this feeling that he needed to get all his powers back. The guy sighed and thought that the feeling of newly acquired strength was incredible after all. The elf suddenly heard something and her ear twitched slightly. She tisked unhappily and asked her teacher to be a little more careful. Isen sighed sadly when he heard that. He admitted that he had noticed them a long time ago and the disgruntled heroes turned back towards the forest. There were 3 tree boars standing right in front of them. They were low-level beasts called inferior trolls. The guy had told Rin that these beasts should dwell near the cities, but for whatever reason, they were in the center of the forest. Rin noticed their bloodthirstiness on display. The girl thought that she should have taken care of them on her own. She raised her hand and there was a snap from a lightning discharge at her fingertips. But the guy smiled and said that he would deal with them himself, because this was a great chance to test his strength. He took a couple steps towards the trolls, and the monsters threw themselves at the hero to attack. Isen waited until the enraged trolls came a little closer to him and promised to send them to hell. Once the trolls were in range, the hero used flaming spears. 3 flaming spears formed around the hero and pierced the attacking monsters. The trolls immediately stopped and screamed in pain. Their entire body burst into bright flames in an instant. Eventually, the monsters were burned alive and the girl told the teacher in admiration that his magic was as strong as ever. The boy noticed that his fire was even stronger than when he used it in the other world. He thought that his flaming spear would burn. The blazing spear burned until it completely burned his enemy. When it was over, the fire did go out, leaving only remnants from the monsters. Isen noticed something glowing in one of the troll's bodies. He approached the troll and excitedly pulled a magic stone out of its body. They could collect magic stones from the carcasses of beasts. These stones were very useful due to their versatility. They could either be sold or exchanged for things. A person would definitely not be left in trouble if they had this stone. The hero offered to walk them to the nearest town since they had gotten rid of all their troubles. Isen along with Rin walked along the stone path along the beautiful and clean river towards the town. The lad noticed that this path was perfectly laid out, and the river was quite nice as well. Time had helped make this place more livable. Enjoying the fresh air, the hero took a deep breath. Isen smiled and said that this calmness relaxed him, and Rin agreed with her teacher. But suddenly on the way, their tranquility was interrupted by a certain man who was looking for something in the tall grass of the field. He kept shouting that this thing was missing and the heroes decided to find out what was the matter. The girl who was looking for the missing thing in the grass didn't know what to do. After all, if they didn't open their warehouse, everyone would be in danger. She noticed the main characters on the path and apologized for her behavior and noise. She apologized for disturbing them and asked the boys if they had seen the multicolored key anywhere. She showed the approximate size of it with her hands, but Rin, along with Ison, shook their heads negatively. To be honest, they had just arrived here and hadn't seen anything like that. The girl exhaled tiredly and said that it had happened after all. She didn't know what she should do now, since they barely had any time left. The girl grabbed her head again and thought that she had to find it and was sure that this key had to be here somewhere. While she was thinking about it, Ison and Rinya glanced at each other. They understood each other without words and decided to help this girl. The hero told her that if she let them, they could lend her their helping hand. The girl was thrilled that they were offering their help, but didn't know how to accept it. Besides, she was sure they were going about their business, and she could not ask them for such a thing. But Ison smiled and thought it wouldn't take long. At any rate, he figured she would be the one to find this key. The girl looked at the boy questioningly. The girl told how she used to gather herbs here earlier, but then Cobalt showed up and she decided to chase him away. At that moment her chain broke, and before she knew it, her key had already disappeared. The protagonist realized everything and asked for just a few seconds. Ison leaned on the ground and turned to her. He asked her to respond to his words and tell him where the key that the maiden had lost lay. The maiden noticed how the hero's body began to glow, and became worried that everything was in order. Ison clarified that she discovered the loss when she was at that very spot. He pointed about a finger in the direction of one small tree. The girl hesitantly replied that they were right and assumed that the hero had found it. But Ison smiled and asked her to take her time. For now, he could only say where roughly this key was located. As it turned out, at the moment when the girl chased the Cobalt away, her chain with the key got caught on a branch of a fallen log. The boy pointed to an old log near the bushes and asked her to try to look for the key there. The girl heeded his advice and headed for the log. She was thrilled when she looked at the ground and saw her multicolored key. She exclaimed that it was really there. She thanked the main characters for their help, but Ison thought there was nothing to thank them for the girl had found it herself. The girl apologized and clarified about the magic he had just used. She assumed that with her help the hero was able to see the past and the future, but Ison replied that it wasn't high-level magic and such things could be done by any magic. It was a lost item detection skill that was quite useful in such cases. The spirits of the earth remembered everything as she chased the Cobalt away, and how the keychain had gotten caught on a protruding bough. The girl suggested that in such a case the hero was a famous fortune teller, but the lad replied that he was not such a person. It was just that he could listen to the voices of the spirits of nature. Apparently, this was the first time this girl had encountered this kind of magic. After all, even before Iceness left, there weren't many people using it. The girl replied that she understood. She made sure that Ison was one of the spirit summoners. She asked to know their names and said that she was in debt to them. Ison introduced himself, after which he also introduced his disciple Lynette. The girl replied to Ison and Lynette that she would certainly thank them. She wanted to clarify for what purpose they had come to the city, to stay here to live or to pass through. The boy replied that they planned to stay here for a while. In that case, the girl suggested that they come to the guild alchemist's garden when they had the time, and she would repay them for their kindness. In parting, she thanked them again for their help and was sure they would see each other again. Ison smiled after her and noticed that this girl was quite active. Ryan was very happy that she got her key back and told the teacher that he was as kind as ever. The guy replied that he was just in a great mood. Besides, anyone in his shoes would be excited about a new journey. Rina could agree with him and suggested that the teacher should meet all obstacles with a smile on his face. After a while, the protagonists arrived in the town of Sagittale. Ryan told the master that there were no obstacles in this town and they were able to enter inside without any hindrance. The hero was glad that the location of the building they were heading to had not changed. They arrived at a branch of the Global Guild that was even larger. The Global Guild was an association that collected information about professionals from all over the world. When a person registered, they would receive a global card that would be used as an ID card. A person could walk up to soldiers and show them his card, introducing himself as a traveling merchant. For example, Rin recalled that the guildmaster's general manager had also talked about this in a letter. After consulting with her teacher, she chose her profession. Once the guildmaster's facilities in the Old Town area were improved, congestion was eliminated and security reached a high level, for which they were grateful to him. Ison recalled that it was true. He remembered how he and Ryan had consulted about it a long time ago. The hero was impressed and was glad to see the result with his own eyes. When they got off at the Global Guild, the girl asked the next customers to go through to her. She smilingly welcomed the protagonists to the Global Guild and asked how she could help them. The guy with a smile asked her to make a guild map for them. The girl further clarified about making a global map and asked what it would be used for. Ison replied that he would like to travel around the world. This answer impressed the girl quite a bit. In that case, she suggested that the hero should become an adventurer. It seemed strange to Isen that she might have been surprised by such a request, but it was the first time since she had been working here. The girl replied that most of them were in the company. Few people became adventurers in peacetime. The guy thought that actually by registering his card he was getting a compendium of occupations. By choosing one of them, he was already authorized to work as a company. In the past, only 30% of people who became adventurers traveled by accepting various requests. The girl grinned and admitted that the guys were quite daring and she longed for it. She admitted her fault that they had deviated from the topic and asked them to write their name and work on the form she had provided. Rin took the form and was surprised when she told the teacher that there were quite a few words and they were all occupations. Isen seemed to understand her surprise, for this was a first for her. He speculated that they might have been told about it at the temple. On this form, she had to circle the job she wanted. Rina could also choose one or even several occupations. The hero was sure that he was a prophet and a scholar. Plus he had about 4 or 5 other professions. His previous card had been destroyed during the war with the evil god, and Isen was glad that it could be made up as many times as he wanted. The hero stared at the form in surprise, and it seemed to the girl that something was bothering him. Isen said that there was just no way he could find the profession of a prophet. The administrator was shocked that the hero was going to take the profession of a prophet, and made sure that it was true. The hero didn't realize what the big deal was and the girl hoped he wasn't joking. She leaned over and whispered to him that the last prophet had died 15 years ago, and they were all extinct. Isen thought about that and chuckled. He scratched the back of his head and thought that it might have really been true. The girl warned that if he chose the profession of a prophet, he would be haunted by the dead and the Reaper would be summoned. However, now there was something more serious. Her words managed to worry Rin and Isen wanted to know what she was talking about. The administrator was surprised at how easily the hero could call himself a prophet, and perhaps there was something he didn't know about. She told him that the king had been issuing a decree for years. He said that if there was anyone found who called himself a prophet, to report it immediately. Before reporting, they were to mobilize all the guards in the city and all the guild members in the neighborhood and accompany him. Rina covered her mouth to avoid showing her smile. Isen also grinned, not believing that she was saying it seriously. The girl said that if he really called himself a prophet, they would report him and protect him, and it would be a big deal. She was convinced that the hero was indeed a prophet, for there had been a serious incident in the past when someone claimed to be a prophet and was captured. Isen reflected on the fact that it was not a lie and he was indeed a prophet, but it would be better if they didn't tell anyone about it. The hero looked at Rina, who was silently waiting for him to answer. The guy asked to take it as a joke and said that he would register for another job. He thanked the girl for telling them about it. The receptionist smiled and hoped she had helped them. She admitted that the joke seemed strange to her. Besides, he introduced himself as a person who was going to be a daring traveler. Isen couldn't tell her that it was true, and he couldn't let them get into trouble for patrolling guards on the streets. Still, the guy thought the king was a bit overzealous. Isen thought about professions that didn't stand out and would help him travel, and the profession he was suited for. The hero thought he was going to be a spiritualist and circled the profession on the form. The girl smiled and said that after she got the form from him, she would now issue him a card. The receptionist asked him to wait just a couple of minutes and placed a blank card on the table beside the form. The girl then took the stamp and applied it to the 2 documents at the same time. The seal combined them, after which all the information from the form was transferred to the hero card. The receptionist handed the card to Isen and said that everything was in order now. She welcomed the hero as a spiritualist adventurer once again to their global guild. The guy gladly accepted his card and thanked her for her help. After issuing the card, the girl asked to come to the table at the end of the counter. The hero did not understand what she wanted to do. The receptionist took a wooden tray with 5 small balls on it. She placed it on the table, and Isen wondered what it was. The girl smiled and said that it was a magic power research board, and if he didn't know about it, he must have made himself a card for the first time. She reminded him again of that strange joke he said earlier. The guy smiled, thinking to himself that it was just a misunderstanding, and that everything was fine. It was just his old perception of the post-war guild reform. The girl decided to explain and said that those who made the new cards should measure their magic power, after which they would be distributed from rank S to rank Ka. By specifying individual ability values, the guild could choose a suitable job for him and reduce the number of accidents and dangerous jobs. The hero only now remembered that his apprentice had written to him about something similar in a letter. It was he who had invented the instrument for measuring magical power that had become used in the guild, and it was the first time Isen had seen it with his own eyes. The girl smiled and said that the one who developed this rule was the guild's counselor, and he was one of the hundreds of heroes. Plus, she mentioned that she wanted to fully thank them and their teacher. The guy thought that it was completely unthinkable that the creator of this thing happened to be his student. He smiled at the girl and asked about what he should do. The girl replied that they would start with Aizen-sama and asked him to touch the right edge of the board. She pointed her finger and the hero slowly brought his hand to the edge of the board. The girl specified that the number of broken crystals would show the level of his magic power. He would get rank K if the crystal on the right side shattered and rank G if all 5 shattered. The average value of the new Spiritualist's magic power reached rank N. No sooner had the girl explained to the end about the board than all the marbles exploded in an instant. The guy looked at the shocked girl and told her that all the crystals shattered. The people sitting behind them saw all this and were shocked. One of the guys exclaimed that the new Spiritualist had broken all the crystals on the magic power research board. It was a rare event that you don't see every day. The girl thought that it was true, and it turns out Isen had great magical power himself, so she decided to mark him a rank G. The guy asked what he should do now, and the girl asked him to wait for just a minute. Everyone present started to follow the characters with interest. She brought a new board with magic balls where there were only 3 pieces and said that it would help to determine the F and D rank. But to their surprise, barely the hero touched the board as all 3 balls shattered. Meanwhile, all the people present started discussing it vigorously and could not believe that the guy had passed the D rank. It was the first time they had seen a rookie advance through the ranks so quickly. Isen had the feeling that there were a lot more people now, and he was curious to know the number of D rank holders. The still surprised admin brought another board to Isen and tried using it. The guy assumed it was the last one since the board had the characters of SS, A, B, and TS group on it. In that case, he decided to get it over with as soon as possible and put his hand on it. The crystal that was to the right of everyone cracked right at the hero's hand. Everyone around him squealed that it was rather unthinkable, for his crystal had cracked. Apparently, it seemed to the hero that the whole thing was turning into a show. The girl didn't know what to say, for she couldn't believe that the hero would become a B rank at once. If that were to happen, she would most likely have to report it to the castle, and she needed to calm down first. Out of confusion, she couldn't find her report. She also needed to check the format of the report to send to the king. Meanwhile, another crystal on the board shattered, which impressed everyone around them. They wondered how many more Isen would break. The guy looked at the 2 remaining crystals and thought that it might have been dangerous. He tried to control his magic in order to keep all the crystals on the board from exploding. In the end, the 2 remaining crystals remained intact. Silence fell and the girl thought that this was the end of it. In that case, their measurement was over and the girl assigned him a rank TS. The administrator exclaimed to Isen that it was simply amazing and he was able to become TS rank so quickly. All the guys present shouted to the newcomer that it was pretty cool and he was able to surprise them. It seemed to them that the rookie's spiritualist level was clearly above average. The hero waved his hand and thanked them for their support. Mentally, he was glad that he was able to stop at TS rank. After all, if he had broken the B crystal, someone would have reported it to the king immediately, and it might have caused a lot of excitement. The hero thought that it would be great if he could travel without burdening his students or anyone around him, except in emergencies, of course. The girl exclaimed that a little more and his magic power would be B rank, and that was a wonderful result. The hero thanked the administrator for her help and said he would take it into consideration. The girl asked him to wait a little longer, because he had a parting gift from the guild waiting for him. As a result, the hero became a wizard by profession. Rin also received her card. The administrator assumed that her magic power was above TS rank. The hero became convinced that Rin's magical power was above those ranks, and she was aware of the fact that she could follow the Iceman. Her name was also little known among the other disciples. The girl smiled and said that traveling with Sensei was a joy for her. While they were seated at a table, the receptionist approached them and apologized for the wait. There was a certain man with her and the guy asked who it was. The man approached the administrator of the Kathia and asked to tell him everything. Dominic-san was a spiritualist of E rank. He was a 10-year veteran and as a parting gift, Isen could train with him. The man greeted the promising newcomer with a smile and promised to tell him all about spirits. The surprised Isen clarified once more about his parting lesson. The girl explained that every time a newcomer gets his card, they give him a free lesson to acquire the necessary knowledge and skills. It was great that they were doing it for free. Moreover, the class is taught by a real teacher, which is much better than just a textbook. Using textbooks from the company, it would be like a game of who's better, so experts from the guild are hired for the classes. Through quality work, the trust in guilds and companies was maintained. Also, this scheme was created by a counselor whose name was Felicia. When the girl wanted to thank her, she said that it was all thanks to the master's advice, so they had to thank him. The administrator always thought that the teacher was a great and wise person. Isekai'd was a little embarrassed by all this because he was treated a little differently in other places. He remembered that moment when he received a letter with a question from Felicia, and this was the result of his help. The hero realized what true destiny meant. However, now all the sorcerers are in another place, so Rin-san is not here. But Rin smiled at the receptionist and said that everything was fine. The hero said that in that case he would be happy to accept the offer from Katia-san. He also asked Dominic-san to take care of him. The man was happy to have a chat with him. Besides, he thought he would be rejected because of his E rank. After the greeting, they moved to the training room 2F. The man stood in front of the guy and began his explanation. According to him, a spirit mage, based on the name, was communicating with spirits and using their magic and skills. Basically, the protagonist asked for help from nature spirits or made a contract with them to be able to always use their power. With these words, the man opened his bag, from where a light cloud of energy flew out and encircled his arm. The hero assumed that this blue light was his spirit. Dominic smiled and agreed with the boy's assumption. To be precise, the lower class light spirit is one of his contracted spirits. In his case, he received requests from cartographers and scouts. After all, he has flying spirits that inspected the area for demonic beasts. For example, since Atisu-san is an adventurer, the company would have fewer jobs. Although most people thought that this job was not noteworthy, Isekai'd thanked Dominic-san, because thanks to him, he would be able to prepare himself. Dominic suggested that they continue, for he wanted to tell him how to communicate with the spirit. The man looked at his hand, after which he used the creation of a magic ball. When a bright and shining ball appeared in Dominic's hand, his little spirit flew up and absorbed it. The hero assumed that this was his communication with the spirit. Dominic smiled and said it was one of the methods of encouraging food. If he gave the spirit food in the form of magic, it would help the hero in exchange. With this magic, Dominic would summon the spirit and could make it sing. The hero knew that the spirits were honest, so they tried to give back what they got. Dominic hoped the guy had memorized the spell and the Isekai'd agreed. The hero clarified that he meant creating a magic ball and tried to create one. Dominic found it incredible that he was able to replicate his orb the first time. Plus it was quite large. The man thought that the magic power of a rank TS was amazing. Isekai'd said that it was all thanks to him and his spirit was surely of the same opinion. The man laughed and was glad that the hero thought so. He summoned his spirit to him and thanked Isekai'd for his help. From the way the spirit behaved, the hero assumed they had a great relationship. Dominic smiled and said all this because they had been together for a long time. Isekai'd asked the man if he communicated with his spirit. Dominic didn't understand what he meant and the hero said that his spirit obviously talks to him a lot. It seemed impossible to the man that the hero understood the language of spirits. He recalled that when he caressed it, it would begin to squeak. And if the Isekai'd knew what that meant, he was simply amazing. The man wanted to know from the hero what his piercing and squeaking sound meant. Dominic couldn't wait to find out what his spirit was saying. The hero heard his voice clearly and relayed that the spirit was thanking Dominic for treasuring him. But he didn't care how many magic balls he used. That was roughly what his spirit was saying, which surprised the man. Dominic's spirit just jumped for joy and Dominic thought he was being played a joke on. The boy smiled and said that he had just translated his words and he wasn't lying to him. Dominic stared at the Iceman and exclaimed that he was amazing. After all, it is very difficult for humans to understand the language of spirits. Only high-level spirit mages could use the technique of talking to a spirit. The hero was surprised that talking to spirits was a very difficult technique, but Dominic confirmed it. He had been practicing it for a long time but had only learned a few words. He could understand his senses by his movements, but no more, although he had heard that some people had the ability to speak the language of spirits from birth. Dominic never thought he would see such a man with his own eyes and, moreover, a novice. It seemed to the boy that Dominic was a very good man since he praised him so much. The man stared at the hero, after which he apologized, since he was very surprised by it. He thought that nothing could surprise him, but the hero was able to do it, for he was very promising. In the end, in their lesson, Isekai'd himself taught him a few things and that's where he decided to end. Lastly, he told the guy that he would make a first-class spirit mage. and as his mentor, Dominic wanted to give him positive recommendations. He admitted that he lost to him in the magic of communicating with spirits. The hero thought that simply being able to talk to spirits would already give him a good grade. Dominic apologized for not being able to teach him, but they were now colleagues. The hero shook the man's hand and said that he was still very grateful to him. After all, he was able to meet an experienced spirit mage. Ryan waited for Iceness to return and greeted him. While he was gone, she got a map of the city from Keisha, and even the inns were marked on it. The lad praised Rina and told them that it was about time they found one. The Sand Registrar told them that there were many good inns around the guild. Ison wanted to pick a good place. After all, they would be in this town for about a week, and Rin was in agreement with him. She talked to the bartender about the exchange rate, which hadn't changed too much in 20 years, so they would be able to live in a nice inn for 3 months. Ryan had a magic bag with her that held more than it looked like. It seemed useful to her that she had taken it, and now for a while money would not be a problem. Apparently, as an adventurer, Ison would be able to sell information to cartographers about where they had gone. Suddenly, a certain girl ran up to them, making sure they were indeed Ison and Rin. The hero looked at the girl questioningly. It was the same girl who had lost the key and they had helped her. She was an alchemist and her name was Jurica. She was insanely happy that she had met them, because they were the talk of the guild. So she decided to meet them in person. She felt that finding them here was a true destiny. Ison clarified with Jurica that there were indeed many who knew about them. The girl smiled and replied that there was no need to address her so respectfully. She was friends with almost all the workers in the guild and had heard from them that 2 people with amazing magic power had just registered with the guild. Since they had already helped her with their amazing power, she immediately guessed that it was them. She clarified that they both became adventurers and the guys confirmed it. In that case, she would like to ask them to come to her store nearby in the alchemist's garden. They had absolutely everything from alchemy materials to magic tools. The girl was sure they would be able to find something for themselves as well. Ison certainly didn't mind looking at it all, but they needed to find an inn before all the rooms were taken. Jurica clarified that their store was also an inn, so they could come to them. She pointed out the location of the alchemist's garden to the guys on the map. The hero admitted that it was a nice place, so he thought they would stay there. The girl wanted to pay for their stay, even though the heroes insisted on paying for their own. Jurica replied that it was okay because the key was very important, so she asked for permission to pay for their lodging. In that case, Ison accepted her offer and decided to stay at their inn. He wanted to hear the opinion of Rin, who gladly agreed with him. If she could follow her teacher, she would like any inn he suggested. Jurica promised that their company would welcome them with everything they had. A couple minutes walk away from the guild was the very same store of Yuria. The guys noticed that it was pretty big, and the girl answered the heroes that it was in the biggest store in town. At the entrance hung a sign Garden Alchemist and the guys went inside. Inside, the shopkeepers greeted the president Jurica and made sure everything was fine. They didn't expect her to come back so soon. The girl smiled and replied that she just met someone. Ison and Rin looked at each other in surprise. They did not know about her being the president, and the girl replied that she had not told them something. Jurica was the president of the alchemy company of the alchemist's garden. She formally greeted the guys and said that she was glad to meet them. The heroes took a seat at the nearest table to wait for Jurica. One of the workers that was standing nearby was telling the other how this spirit mage had helped the president of the Jurica. They had already heard that he was still a newcomer, and there was a rumor that 2 amazing people had joined the guild. The guy replied that their president was strong, although she could be a bit careless at times, and he wondered how the hero had helped the Jurica. They wondered if the rumors really didn't lie. Ison heard them perfectly and looked at the boys. Rin whispered to the hero that the situation was becoming similar to the one in the guild. The hero was amazed at how quickly the rumors were spreading, and it's most likely because the guild was nearby. Jurica approached the heroes and said that their room would be ready soon. She asked for permission to talk to Isines, and the hero was fine with that. From all of the above, Jurica was the president of this store, and it was unclear to the hero why a person like her was outside the walls of the city. Jurica admitted that she was looking for special herbs to negotiate. The herb growing there is necessary for the potion, so she decided to gather it alone to prove to everyone that she could do it herself. It became clear to the guy how everything happened. As they were talking, a man approached her Jurica and asked for her attention. He apologized for bothering her and thanked her for her help. Jurica smiled and replied that it was okay, especially since she had decided to do it herself. and she was the one who lost the key to the magic warehouse. Yurika asked to thank the main characters for that, because they had helped her. The man bowed and thanked their president for helping them. More precisely, the man should have been thanked for saving their company's negotiations, and the man thanked them sincerely for the second time. This negotiation was very important to them and also for the future of their company. The hero didn't think he was doing anything special, after all. He had just found the key, so they shouldn't have gone that far. Yurika grinned, but Isen didn't understand what was wrong. Yurika apologized and said that a very strange thought came into her head. As she looked at Isen herself, she thought of the man who had trained her. They just had similar energy, and the hero asked about this person. The girl said that she should have called her master because she taught her many important things. She said that Yurika had to do whatever she could regardless of her position in the company. That was what she had been taught by one of the hundreds of heroes. And by the way, she also became the president of the university. Rin was surprised that Master Yurika-san was one of the 100 heroes, and the girl confirmed it. It was the president of the University of Kunai Magic named Male-san. Isen mentally recalled that the sorceress named Mel was an energetic girl. Instead of attending the main school in the capital, Yurika studied at a branch school that was much closer. She did not sit in the capital but traveled to different places. For the last few years, Chalk taught at a university near the city. The southern branch of the Magic University in Sagittal was the president's room. The young man went inside it and addressed Ms. Chalk Rose. He handed her this week's guild report. A long-haired girl wearing a huge hat thanked the man and said she would look it over now. Using her long hair, she took the report from the guy and looked at it. The guy also notified that there was a man who wanted to meet her. He was very suspicious and hid his face behind a magic mask. But the Chalk replied that she knew him so they could skip this person. The tall man walked to their room and the girl smiled. She told Mr. Duke that he was quite seldom away from the capital. The king took off his mask and smiled. He replied that he worked nearby, which is why he decided to stop by to visit her. Besides, he had to tell her something about Master Iceness. He thought that now the most cherished wish of all students would finally be fulfilled. They had been wondering daily lately and had recently learned that a powerful prophet had appeared in this world. Ms. Mel was shocked to hear about the prophet and thought their master was returning. But Duke said that was not so, for the divination did not say that it was exactly Master Isen. They also did not know when exactly it would happen, and the details of what happened were unknown. Miss Chalk lowered her head and sighed sadly. She knew that Duke's accuracy was almost on par with the master, but those who would not come had the ability of a prophet and were priceless. The girl wanted to greet him, especially if it was their master. Duke replied that they had given special instructions to the guild, so they were preparing to greet him. In that case, the girl felt that she needed to finish her work so she could greet Master Iceness. The king's eyes lit up and he exclaimed that he would like to greet him as well. Talking about work, he heard that the global guild master in the city is a pioneer. Mel confirmed what he said and said that being a master was quite difficult but fun. In addition, she could teach children. She had a weekly report of how many experts of each rank appeared in the city guild, and they could check every class and rank. This season, they had pretty good numbers. The girl said that they had D ranks and some TS ranks. The king was pleased that more people were willing to work hard for the good of the capital, but the Chalk should have warned about the bad news. She told the king that the number of monsters around the city had been increasing over the past few months. They had a lot of guys with high physical strength, but the mages were running out. Duke thought that this could lead to a decrease in public safety. Once Chalk returned to the capital, the king would like to ask her to consider sending professional mages on this mission. The girl told the Duke that she would leave it up to him. She could also send them the reports in letters. Duke agreed and thought that he would like to send a letter to Master Isen right now, and the girl understood him perfectly. Still, it would be much better for them if the master himself came here. The next morning, the hero woke up in his room and thought it was strange. He looked at the neighboring bed where Rin was sleeping and thought that she usually got up much earlier. In her sleep, she mumbled something about sensei and smiled. Isen looked at her with a smile and decided to let her sleep some more. But suddenly the girl woke up and wiped her eyes. Isen was glad that she was already awake. The guy sat down at the table and the girl apologized for oversleeping. But the hero thought that she had nothing to apologize for because everything was fine. Rin disagreed with him, because as his student, she was supposed to take care of him, and she ended up neglecting herself. Isen thought that she shouldn't have blamed herself. Rin told the teacher that if he read the letters, he would see that all the students were greatly concerned about him. The boy noticed that Rin was very tired since yesterday. In addition, her biological clock was a bit on the fritz from traveling around the world. The girl reminded that Sensei uses magic power while traveling. Therefore, she would like to get up at the same time as the teacher tomorrow. The teacher's stamina was very high, so she had to adapt to it. The guy thought it would be a good idea to get physical strength and believed that Rin would do her best. The hero agreed with her and noticed that she was now fully awake. He suggested that Rin take a tour of the city and its surroundings after breakfast, and the girl gladly agreed to his idea. She was already looking forward to going on a little trip with her teacher. The boy laughed and said that in that case they would sightsee in the Sejilla. This town turned out to be quite crowded and noisy. The boys strolled around and looked into various food stalls and flower stores. The girl also showed Sensei the juices from the special fruits of the pioneer town. They decided to try one of each and were convinced that it was quite tasty. After that, they went to a farm with horses, and after that they walked to the big statue in the center of the town. When their walk came to an end, the boys climbed to the roof of the alchemist's garden, where they had a pretty nice view of the city and the nature in the distance. The hero was in agreement that it was very beautiful, also peaceful, and the scenery was simply spectacular. Rina thought it was cool that Jurika-san opened the roof for them. Isen assumed that there must be a branch of a magical university behind the hill, but he hadn't seen it for some reason. The girl assumed he was talking about the university where the Chalk-san was now. The hero thought that she knew that Chalk was an excellent sorceress. He wanted to be sure to introduce the girls to each other. Rin was thrilled that the heroes really wanted to do that, but the guy didn't see why he would be against it. Besides, good connections never hurt, and since Isen-sensei insisted on it, Rin would love to meet the Chalk. They heard the sound of the bell and remembered that it was in the letter. The bell of the Global Guild was announcing the coming of noon. The hero looked at his watch with a smile and said that traveling around the city took quite a long time. He suggested to Rina to have lunch at the guild today. She didn't mind. Plus there were dishes served exclusively at the guild here. Isen agreed that the vegetables and meat here were very tasty, just like the apprentice's letter said. There was fertile land nearby. The farm on it raised cattle whose meat was a delicacy. That was exactly what the letter of the Chalk-san said. The hero smiled and admitted that he was glad he had come to this town, and it was by far the best part of his journey. Suddenly a woman's voice was heard, who was glad to meet the Iceman and his companion here. It was the Registrar Keisha, who was glad that they were still in their city. She smiled and admitted that it was wonderful to meet them here, for she really needed their help. Isen listened to her with all his attention. It seemed to the girl that the wind spirit was making noise in the farmlands near the town, so they had to fight it. But their strength was not enough. The spirits were a creature that only a spirit mage could deal with. It was for this reason that she needed the help of an Iceman. The hero replied that it was an emergency situation, so they had to act urgently. The girl explained that the farmlands and gardens would be destroyed by the wind spirit and innocent people could have been affected. There had been no casualties so far, but if this continued, the town would be in serious danger. The hero hesitated and said that he understood her perfectly well. All the students at the magical university are very talented, based on the Chalk's letter, and it will be bad if the students she is so proud of get hurt. The guy said they would definitely help them with that. The girl got excited and said that this request was specifically for TS rank Isen and Rin Sama. The hero smiled and said that they would try their best. Rin also promised to help her master in this matter. Keisha thanked the boys and asked them to follow her. She wanted to introduce them to the person who would explain everything and also accompany them. The guys went up the stairs and walked to the reception area behind the receptionist. Hero as well as Dominic were surprised to see each other. The guy greeted Dominic-san, but the man asked him not to be called so formally. He was honored to work with them. The hero explained that his skill allowed him to communicate with spirits and asked Dominic to take care of them. Dominic was counting on their help and hoped they would make it work. The man also thought it was not a very pleasant task. Isen asked the receptionist for more details about this assignment. The girl took out a card and asked for some time. She spread it out on the table and pointed to the forest that was between the farm and the orchard. They needed to do a thing similar to the wind spirit, then it would surely calm down. They could use the subdue and repel method, or any other method that would handle it. Ryan thought that basically they could use anything and Kathia confirmed it. She hoped that Isen herself and her companion could help them. The enemy was very strong, so she would like to leave it up to them. As far as they knew, the tornado was appearing in the forest, but the spirit itself was not visible, and its class was unknown to them. The hero did not understand how the situation became so dangerous. After all, there must be a reason why the spirit could become enraged. The administrator confirmed this and said that the spirits did not start behaving this way out of nowhere. However, when the scouts asked the eyewitnesses, they said that it started suddenly. It appeared that the spirit became angry for reasons unknown to them. The girl replied that their goal was to calm the spirit down. They also needed to find out the reason for its anger, so she wished that the heroes would not chop from the shoulder. And, of course, they would be sure to pay them for the information they received. Isekai'd clarified that they needed to find out the cause of the spirit's anger and calm it down. The difficulty of the task was no less than rank D, and it was quite difficult. Rin was surprised that this was indeed the case, and Keisha confirmed it. A spirit that was not affected by physical attacks for some unknown reason suddenly went on a rampage, and there were many reasons why it was a D rank assignment. Since it's D rank, the difficulty will only increase. Dominic smiled and said that he was sent to do this assignment because he had already worked as a spirit mage for 10 years. But still, he felt that the job would be a bit difficult. He was impressed that Isen-san and his girlfriend apparently weren't too worried about it. They looked rather calm, and Dominic thought it was because of their rank. Still, he felt a little insecure. The man replied that for a person who was immediately rated at rank TS to go on a task with difficulty D was like becoming a Tengu that reeked of arrogance. But Dominic could see that the hero was not an arrogant, promising rookie, so he was very pleased to work with him. Isen was glad that Dominic had such an opinion of him and offered to go on this assignment as soon as possible. Keisha warned that they had regeneration potions in their guild just in case and asked the guys to be careful. The protagonists, along with Dominic, left the town and headed towards the forest along the path. They reached a place where a huge tornado was raging. The boys were impressed by such power and raised their heads to the sky. It seemed to the hero that it was still a small storm and not a tornado. According to the guild scout, there was a spirit sitting in the center of the vortex, and Dominic confirmed it. Because of its wide range, they have to go around it. The man said he would lead it. Dominic stretched out his hand and summoned his spirit art. Voila! The little spirit squeaked, then turned into a shell that was like a shield. The walls of the spirit grew until the heroes were completely inside the protective ball. Dominic smiled and told the boys that if they followed him, they wouldn't feel the gusts of wind, and asked them to conserve their power until the right moment. The hero decided that he would address the earth and the atmosphere first and asked them to give him a voice. Dominic realized that Isen was using protective magic, and the hero agreed with him. He motioned for his partner to move on, and Dominic agreed. The hero was impressed and told Dominic that thanks to his orb the debris was out of their eyes. Dominic thanked him for his praise. He was glad that he was able to help them in some way after all. They still needed to be more careful, and the hero turned his attention to the tornado above. The boy asked Dominic to sit down, but the man didn't understand what it was for. Isen heard the voice of a stone spirit, which warned him that a stake would fly through here. The uncomprehending Dominic looked questioningly at the hero and himself did not notice how something flew over his head. Dominic looked in horror at the wooden stake that was stuck in front of them and realized that he almost died. He wondered how the hero had predicted it, but the boy replied that it wasn't a prediction. He was just listening to the voice of the spirits around him to control the situation. The man was shocked that the hero could hear the voices of the spirits even in strong winds. Isen smiled and admitted that it was quite comfortable, and the man said that Isen was amazing as usual. The hero wanted to make sure Dominic was okay, and the man replied that he just kept surprising him. Dominic asked permission to get up, and the hero said he was already fine. They had to continue on their way, and now they could see him. Right in front of them was an egg. Apparently, it was the spirit that had caused the tornado. Dominic couldn't understand its level yet, and they needed to get even closer to it. The egg-shaped core began to stretch and created a dark hole in the center. Dominic and everyone present noticed that inside this cocoon sat a spirit that outwardly resembled a girl. Dominic was shocked that this spirit could take on a human form. If it could do that, its level of magic power was very high, and it was an elder spirit. The girl that was sitting in the cocoon opened her eyes and looked at the heroes. Dominic explained that there were spirits that changed their appearance and went into hibernation. For this reason, the scout couldn't recognize his level, and their business was bad. Elder spirits only lived in secluded places, such as a sacred mountain or a magical spring. In order to challenge him, he had to be at least B rank, and in order to fight, a rank, otherwise they wouldn't get away alive. Dominic knew that F rank mages couldn't match such a spirit, and this task is at least B rank. But as a professional, Dominic thought he had to help the newcomers escape with this, because they still had a long time to live. That spirit was approaching them, but she didn't look hostile. However, Dominic had to strengthen their defenses and prepare for battle. Barely Dominic raised his hand as the girl pointed her finger at him. At the same moment, his spirit dissolved and there was a big explosion that threw Dominic backwards. The explosion was so strong that the man flew several meters and crashed into the nearest tree behind him. Dominic realized that it was a magical wind blow. He had only been saved by the small sphere that had enveloped him, but this spirit had unleashed so much magical power with just the movement of a single finger. The man hoped that the newcomers were safe and raised his head. Dominic was relieved that he was the only one who was hurt. He figured that if he went back and became the bait, they could escape. Dominic tried to get up, but his body wouldn't move. Apparently he was paralyzed from the blow, and that was bad. The spirit raised its arm again, and Dominic realized it was moving too slowly. Dominic realized it was aiming at the Iceman and asked the guy to run away from here. But the hero asked not to worry about him and used the staff cut. The spirit pointed its finger at the hero and Iceman leaned slightly to the side. He missed part of the attack and cut it with his staff. Dominic stared in surprise at the hero who wanted to make sure he was alright. The man was impressed with his strength and asked the Iceman how he did it. The hero smiled and said he just used a little bit of magic. He used the magic of prophecy to turn his staff into something capable of cutting a strong wind with a single blow. But Iceman wanted to avoid unnecessary explanations so as not to create unnecessary misunderstandings. The hero swung his staff and reflected the blow of the spirit that was confused. The guy smiled and motioned for her to continue at the same pace. The confused spirit continued to attack the hero, but time after time he repelled her blows with his magic staff. Iceman raised the staff to the top and sliced the spirit's blow in half. Meanwhile, Rin deftly fended off the many rocks that were falling in their direction, and Dominic thought it was amazing. He had no idea that the girl was used to close combat, and Rin turned toward him. While fending off blows, she was telling him in parallel that Isen's skill was simply astounding. But Dominic clarified that he was referring to her. The man frowned and thought that there was nothing more they could do about it, all for the reason that their attacks were useless against the elder spirit, because only adventurers of a rank could fight her on equal terms. But the hero smiled at Dominic and clarified that they didn't need to fight her. Dominic didn't believe that the guy wanted to talk to her, for it might have been too risky. Dominic was afraid that this spirit wouldn't want to talk to him or suddenly he would inadvertently hurt her, and they could have been seriously hurt. But Iceman asked him not to be afraid, for he would sort it all out. At any rate, he wanted to try. The boy took a couple steps closer to the spirit and greeted her. He wished she would take a moment to speak to him. The girl was surprised when the hero came closer and rubbed her eyes. She pointed her finger at the hero and said it was him. As Iceman thought, she could talk after all. Besides, she had consciousness and her eyes showed that she was intelligent. Meanwhile, the girl made her assumption towards the guy. Dominic noticed that she was probably upset, and if something happened, he was willing to distract her and let the newcomers escape. Spirit covered her eyes and said that human language annoyed her. Therefore, unless the hero spoke in the spirit language, she would not answer him. She already knew that the hero was a prophet named Isekai'd. He was the one who defeated the evil gods and sword demons while protecting the spirit queen, and also learned the magic of the current spirit king. The hero was a little confused, but said that everything was correct. The girl was delighted and said that it was amazing. She was happy to see him, as she was a big fan of his. Isekai'd was surprised that she knew him. But the girl replied that he was very famous in the spirit world, for he was a hero who saved the spirit world and he was loved by many people for that. And her mentor was a relative of the departed spirit emperor. He was kind and cheerful, had great power and was always taking care of them. Isekai'd had never heard anything like this before. It was true that he had defeated the evil spirits, but being a hero to the spirits was too much for him. In fact, he was in a different universe and about the spirit world he didn't even know about. The elder spirit smiled and said that she was in a half sleep, so she didn't notice him right away. The guy compared her to a cat that slept curled up in a ball. Dominic told the hero that he heard a combination of high and low sounds, and he wasn't sure if it was okay. But the hero smiled and said that the spirit was much friendlier than he thought, so he asked to give them some time. It was just as the spirit had expected. She had heard that their language was difficult for humans, as it was saturated with magic, but the Isekai'd spoke it quite fluently. The prophet's job was precisely to use this language, so it made sense that he was pretty good at it. The hero would want to know what she was creating such a strong wind for. The girl didn't know what he meant, but assumed he meant the breeze she made to warn people. The guy pointed his finger up and said that to them it was a small breeze, but to the humans it was a strong hurricane. Still, the perception of reality differed from race to race. If she wanted to attack, she would have long ago launched 1 or 2 streams of wind at the Isekai'd. The hero assumed that she wanted to warn the humans about something and thought that they had something wrong. The girl replied that this was exactly the case. She tried to warn that there were demonic beasts in the forest that spread miasma. Miasma was a special magical power that amplified demons. It caused mutations in a person's body or spirit depending on how much of it was inhaled. It was also the miasma that the evil god turned in his body. Thus he scattered his flesh all over the world, and the hero must have been aware of the existence of other places full of miasma. Isekai'd already knew that some demonic beasts had eaten those pieces of flesh, and the girl confirmed it. She believed that this explained everything. When the demonic beasts ate the flesh of the evil god, a miasma-producing organ would be created in their body. The Spirit King told the girl to keep people away from these demonic beasts until they were defeated, so she decided to create some light winds to keep them away. Now it was clear to Isekai'd what she needed this tornado for. In that case, he asked her to tell him everything they knew about their demonic beast. The spirit told him that it was called a horned mole, and it looked like a mole with a large horn. This beast wasn't particularly strong and usually hid underground or in trees, but since she wasn't very good at precision attacks, she couldn't defeat it. Theoretically, if it was defeated, the miasma would disappear. Dominic noticed that Isekai'd was surprised about something, but Dominic was no less surprised by the fact that the hero could talk to a higher spirit. The man didn't know what they were talking about, so he decided to just trust the Isekai'd-san. Dominic noticed that the girl made some kind of strange gesture that could mean that she wasn't happy. Because of all the uncertainty of the situation, Dominic was starting to get very nervous. Meanwhile, the girl was talking about how she was tired of sending attacks that didn't even work, so she decided to take a break for a while. It became clear to Isekai'd why this spirit was hanging around here. Rin smiled and asked Dominique to rest for a while. She was sure that Isekai'd would make things right. The hero suggested that in that case, she take out her hurricane and he would definitely do something about that demonic beast. The higher spirit was surprised that the hero could do that. She admitted that she would be very grateful to him if the prophet Isekai'd would lend them his help. The hero smiled and said that it would help both humans and spirits. The higher spirit wanted to make sure that they could count on Prophet Isekai'd. She immediately warned the prophet that if he could not defeat the monster, she would create the hurricane again. Therefore, she warned him that she would keep an eye on him. In that case, the hero suggested that they start and the girl smiled. She said that if he defeated it, she would definitely thank him. The spirit noticed that they had chatted too much and wished to say goodbye already. The girl soared into the air and flew away. Dominic looked at her in shock and confessed that he had never seen anyone face such a strong spirit before. The heroes looked after her until the girl disappeared altogether. Dominic turned to Isekai'd and said that he was really amazing, because he made the higher spirit leave just by talking to her. But the hero replied that he did not chase her away. He explained to Dominic and Rina that the higher spirit had given them a task and told the guys everything. From his story, Dominic realized that this higher spirit was protecting the people. He felt sorry that he thought completely differently. Dominic thought that the girl wanted to cause destruction, but he turned out to be wrong. Isekai'd asked him not to blame himself for it, because in fact it really could have been dangerous for people. Dominic thanked the hero for his support, as he really felt better after his words. The man clarified that their opponents were a horned mole, and apparently this mission was rank D. Isekai'd chuckled and recalled that monsters were also divided into ranks. Dominic said that this demonic beast was powerful in its own way. Furthermore, demonic beasts with miasma power were one rank higher than ordinary beasts. It turned out that a demonic beast generating miasma was equivalent to a rank TS. Dominic believed that in that case, he and Isekai'd were of the same rank, and it was a worthy opponent for him. Still, it was a fierce opponent, so they didn't know what to expect from him. Dominic would gladly like to help the Isekai'd and the hero was surprised. Besides, he reminded that he had made the decision to take this assignment himself. Dominic replied that he was leaving all the work to him, so he would like to be of some use. The hero laughed and said that in that case they would do everything together. During their conversation, Rin was distracted by something. The girl turned her head towards the forest when she heard some sound. Dominic thought it was amazing that the hero knew where to find these creatures. The lad smiled and replied that he had learned it from a higher spirit, but since they came to them on their own, they wouldn't even have to look for them. Ryan confirmed his words, keeping her eyes on the forest. She prepared her blades and said that in all likelihood, they were already on their way here. Not far from the protagonists, dark creatures that looked like horned moles began to crawl out. The monsters made their way directly from under the ground, and some crawled out of the thicket of the forest. The hero assumed that the monster that was in the rear was their boss, and Dominic agreed with his assumption. Dominic also thought that the reason they were walking towards them was because the wind had stopped, and since these three were ranked TS, he could defeat them on his own. With these thoughts, the man rushed forward, but Isekai'd managed to grab his shoulder and asked Dominic to wait for a while. The man didn't understand what the matter was. After all, they had to destroy them. Otherwise the Supreme Spirit would make a hurricane again. The hero didn't argue with that, but he said that there were many more monsters here. With those words, Isekai'd tapped his staff on the ground several times. As soon as he did that, many more creatures began to crawl out from under the ground, which puzzled the Dominic. He exclaimed that there were at least 20 horned moles and they were all crawling toward them. The higher spirit had no warning of their numbers, and the lad assumed they were multiplying from the miasma. The young ones were somewhat smaller than the adults. Of course, miasma could not have accelerated reproduction. However, the strength of the young ones was on par with that of the adults, so now they would have to fight 20 rank 20 creatures. Dominic immediately warned the hero that fighting so many of these creatures was a bad idea, and they just needed to take out the boss that was generating the miasmas. He pointed to the mole and said that once they defeated the miasma spreader, all the others would have to calm down. Isekai'd didn't know that and admitted that would be great. The hero was certainly in agreement with him, but apparently it was impossible right now. Most likely, the monsters saw them as spirits and wanted to eat them because they thought they were delicious. Rin confirmed this and replied that apparently they seemed like a threat to them, so they didn't hesitate to go forward. In any case, they shouldn't have been distracted and just did it, even though they looked like big moles, but the guys had to remember that they were very powerful demons. Isekai'd warned Dominic and Rin that they were on their way here and they should have gotten ready. The protagonists were surprised when suddenly the entire pack of creatures rushed at them with all their legs. Dominic saw them coming, but he didn't understand how Isekai'd knew that. He assumed that the hero could read their movements, but right now it was more important than that. The man extended his arm and used the small spirit light bullet technique. From a single blob of energy, many light bullets were formed, piercing through the enemies and knocking them down. But it wasn't enough to stop everyone else, and Dominic shouted to the others that they were pretty fast. One of the monsters got as close to Dominic as possible and jumped on him. The man reflexively put his hand up on his Isekai'd and defended him. He hit the mole on the head and said it was quite dangerous. Isekai'd wanted to make sure Dominic was okay, but Dominic replied that he was fine and thought to himself that this mole was going to stab him in the arm. The man noticed the attacking monster behind Isekai'd and called out to him. At that moment, a Rin flew up to them and tackled the monster and chopped it into several pieces. The hero smiled and thanked his apprentice for her help. The girl reciprocated and asked him not to worry about it. Besides, she was sure that Isekai'd knew the danger and could handle it alone. Dispatching the rest of the moles, the lad replied that she did it for him, so he was grateful for her help. Rin assisted him in exterminating the enemies and admitted that she really liked the serious sensei. Dominic was impressed that the girl could fight in a close fight, and Rin said she could do it more or less, so she asked to leave those monsters on her, though they might not have needed it. The hero noticed that these monsters were wary, so they didn't dare to approach them. Apparently, the boss was ordering them to flee by creating a certain vibration in the ground. Isekai'd decided that it would be necessary to finish them off before they all ran away. He swung his staff and asked the atmosphere to heed his words. The hero asked it to gather and become his blade, then used the wind blade. The wind blade descended on the pack of moles and cut their bodies in half. Their boss didn't even have time to do anything before his body was similarly disemboweled. Dominic rounded his eyes and exclaimed that it was simply amazing, because he had never seen such strong magic. All the trees nearby collapsed right on top of the moles, and the hero replied that the source of the miasma was absolutely destroyed. Dominic exclaimed that this spell was much more powerful than a higher spirit tornado, and not even a rank B mage could conjure it stronger. The man wanted to know from which reference book the hero had learned this technique. Isekai'd realized that because of the power of this spell, he would have questions, so he replied that he had invented it a long time ago. The basic techniques of magic, prophets people learned from the prophets themselves or restored them by spiritual voices in the houses in which they lived. There were also special books compiled by a retired spiritual emperor. Isekai'd gradually improved his skills, and when he tried to use them, an inner voice appeared that helped him learn everything. Dominic understood everything and was once again convinced that the hero was an incredible person. Besides, to improve his skills and magic on his own would not even be possible for a professional of a rank. And that was something Dominic could tell him as a master. The hero explained that it was all because he didn't have much time before joining the guild. As they were talking, a certain man ran up to them, who called out to them and addressed the travelers. The heroes looked questioningly at the man, who stopped to catch his breath. The man smiled and thanked them for saving his ranch and farm, and Isekai'd realized that he was the owner of the land. The man confirmed this and said that he was the one who had informed the guild and the university about the monsters. It became clear to Isekai'd that he had sought help from two places at once, although it cost money, but the owner of these lands decided it was more reliable. Not only the spirit, but also hordes of demons turned out to be here, and the master was very happy that the protagonists ended up here. At this moment, Isekai'd noticed Dominic's strange behavior and looked at him. The man wiped his eyes, after which he almost fell to the ground, but the hero managed to pick him up. Isekai'd wanted to make sure he was alright, and Dominic apologized to him. Apparently, he had used too much magic in this battle. He thought he looked rather pathetic compared to Rin and Iceness, who were not tired in the slightest. The boy asked him not to worry about it, as everyone's degree of fatigue was different. The landowner agreed with him and offered to eat his specially grown vegetables in that case. Isekai'd had never heard of such a thing, and the man explained that their specialty was that they could restore magical power, so he wanted to treat them to them. The boys agreed to this offer and decided to rest at the same time. The man was happy to hear this and said that his house was nearby, so they didn't have far to walk. The host set the table and the boys thanked him for the treat. The man replied that it was alright, because this way he could thank them for their help. Isekai'd smiled and thought it was the first time he had been thanked for being an adventurer. Dominic told the guys that they used more magical power than he did, so they could take their time. Meanwhile, he was going to return first to report back. As he left, he reminded them that if he reported back early, the mission fee would increase slightly. Besides, he hadn't done anything in the battle, so he asked for permission to let him do at least something for them. In that case, the hero decided to take his time and Rin agreed with him. The sun was still high, so they had nowhere to hurry. Later, they said goodbye to the farm master and headed back. Isekai'd noticed that the magic power recovery effect of the fruits and vegetables was quite high. Rin agreed with him and was glad that Dominic-san was feeling better. The guy thought that it was similar to how he replenished his magic power by taking a low-level potion. But he had only had lunch. Speaking of which, before that, Isekai'd had received a letter from an apprentice who happily wrote that he had become the owner of a farm where he was developing and improving magic restoring crops. The seeds of the crop were distributed to only a few farmers. They were said to be researched, cultivated, and distributed by each company. Just as the hero thought, there is a delightful feeling after the mission, because he might never have felt it. Isekai'd was already looking forward to the next mission. Rin noticed that the book inside Isekai'd's staff began to glow and thought that it was reacting to something. She had some assumptions about that. Isekai'd replied that it was quite possible, and he had most likely left a piece of his power here. The guy pointed his staff towards the stone, causing it to glow even more. The hero assumed that his power was located there. Approaching the stone, Isekai'd smiled and noticed that he was very lucky today. The hero used the unsealing process and performed a release authorization. After that, a magical piece of paper slid into the book and it slammed shut. Rin thought it was amazing that they could get the prophet's power back so quickly, but the hero wanted to call it a mere coincidence. Even though he had scattered his power around the world, he didn't think he could find it in a place like this. The girl inquired about what he had gotten this time. The hero opened his book and looked at the page where it was written about expanding the range of prophecies. Apparently, the area that the prophecy covered had grown. Based on his words, Rinja realized that the prophet's power had become even greater, and she couldn't wait to see Isekai'd in his prime. Now they had finished their work and had a delicious meal, and also the hero had regained some of his power, and it was a great success. He had a rather pleasant feeling, but it was time for them to head back. At the guild house, they were met by the admin girl who was happy that they had returned in one piece. Inside, they were met by a lot of adventurers who recognized the team that had completed the biggest quest. People were happy to see the birth of a new hero. The protagonists were a little confused, but they were met by Dominic, who told the guys that they had returned just in time. The hero wanted to know what it all meant, and Dominic replied that he had just reported the results of the inquiry. The administrator hoped they weren't injured, because it was reported that they both completed the mission without any injuries. The guy replied that everything was fine and they didn't have any injuries. Rin confirmed that they didn't have a scratch on them, and the administrator exclaimed that it was fine. The girl was very happy that they made it back safely. Apparently she was very worried about them, but the hero wanted to know what was wrong. He looked questioningly at the people who kept their gaze on them. The administrator admitted that something happened after Isekai'd and his team left. They received a report from the Magic University. It said that there was a reaction that suggested the presence of demonic beasts in the area. The hero seemed to remember what she was talking about. The landlord told him that he had sent a request to the Magic University as well. The administrator explained that the guild and the Magic University of the city had been working together for several years now. They received information about magic and the latest magical tools that were only available at the university. Though there were times when the exchange of information didn't go smoothly. That was exactly what happened with the request. Since in addition to the spirit there was a large number of horned moles fueled by miasma, the complexity of the query increased and became much higher than B rank. On top of that, the spirit was characterized as supreme. In such a dangerous place, there seemed to be only 3 of them and the entire guild was like on needles. They were already thinking of organizing a rescue team for them. In that case, it was clear to Isin why it was so turbulent here. Dominic, who was in that dangerous place and came back unharmed, confused everyone. Isin looked at the girl questioningly and wanted to make sure it was true. The receptionist smiled and said that Isin had encountered a higher spirit, calmed her down and stopped the tornado. The guy confirmed the fact that he had stopped the tornado and everyone around him began to actively discuss it. They thought it was incredible that he was able to calm a higher spirit and had no doubt that the Isin was actually a TS rank. But the hero mentally considered the fact that the spirit was not enraged and anyone who could talk to the spirit realized that she was easy to deal with. The administrator and everyone else was thrilled that the hero had handled it this way and called it incredible. In addition, he had succeeded in something that an adventurer of TS rank could not have handled. The girl explained that the guild had a profession of detective who could see lies. Therefore, there was no doubt about Dominic's report, but she was struck by how many unbelievable things happened at the same time. Isin didn't understand what they were talking about, since talking to spirits and destroying monsters was something he had been doing for many years. Apparently, they rated it as a difficult job even though it seemed quite simple to him. When the explanation was over, the administrator bowed to the heroes and apologized for this task, for she sent them to a place where the request was more difficult than reported and they were in danger. Isin asked her not to apologize, for they themselves found out much later and nothing could be done about it. Besides, he had done many things, including exterminating monsters, without permission and only wanted to fulfill the request. Therefore, they should not have felt guilty. The girl smiled and admitted that his words made her feel better. She wished to express her gratitude from the bottom of her heart. Since the reward had increased, it would take time to prepare everything. Therefore, she would like to ask them to wait a little longer. The hero understood that, but decided to ask why their reward had increased. The girl smiled and said that they increased it because it was a special case, and the guild's upper management was of the same opinion. The girl couldn't give them anything special, so there would just be an increase in reward and she hoped they wouldn't accept it. Isin thought it was surprising that they increased the reward and wanted to find out more about it from Dominic. He had the feeling that he had told them something. Dominic replied that he had only told what he had seen and thanks to Isin's efforts everything had been fulfilled in no time. Isin thought that even though he had acted without authorization, in all likelihood he would still be able to get the reward. The hero was certainly grateful for that. The guy clarified that if he wasn't mistaken, the compensation fee this time was 15,000 gold for 3 people. He wanted to know how much their compensation had increased. The thing was that with 10,000 gold pieces, one could live in an inn for about a month. Dominic told them how much work had been done beyond the request and the total amount had been increased tenfold. If that was really the case, the hero assumed that they would receive 150,000 gold. But Dominic scratched the back of his head and decided that it still wasn't enough. The administrator explained that working with a higher spirit was traditionally an expensive request that a city or country would request directly, so it was a bit embarrassing to give them such a small amount. Isin asked them not to worry, because even with a tenfold increase, it was a lot of money, and he would be happy to accept them if that was the reward they offered. The hero wanted to make sure Dominic would share the reward with them, but Dominic refused. He said he didn't need the extra reward and everything would be given to them as soon as they said so. Isin did not understand him and Dominic explained that all he had done was to take them to the right place. Therefore, even the usual reward of 5,000 was too high for him. Because of the manner in which everything was accomplished, Isin had to take the offered reward. The hero wanted to make sure that Dominic would accept it, but the man replied that if they didn't accept the reward, then he would also leave his money to the guild. The boy scratched the back of his head and said thoughtfully that he would gladly take the reward, but he had a condition that Dominic would let him treat him to food or sake. After all, if the hero didn't, he would feel a little awkward accepting such a reward. The man blushed and said that Aizen-san always knew how to answer correctly. In that case, Dominic said that his partner also had to go along with them. Isin didn't mind and asked everyone in the guild to eat and drink as much as they wanted. He wanted to have a celebration in honor of their first completed task. So all the guys in the guild celebrated and had fun all night. The next day, Yuria arrived at Saikyou, a branch of the Southern Magical University. She entered the Chalk president's room and said that she had a report from the guild. This time the one who brought her the report was Jirika, and the Chalk thanked her for her help. Since the girl was no longer a student, she didn't have the opportunity to just meet with Mel except on occasions like this. Mel replied to Jirika that she could accept a formal meeting, but Jirika felt that she should not have rearranged her schedule and used the chance of the current students to talk to her. In that case, she would like to visit Chalk if she had the opportunity to run such an errand again. Mel mentally thought that Jirika had deep ties with the guild and the university, so Jirika could provide excellent personnel, which was beneficial to both of them. Mel noticed that Jirika was looking at her funny and asked what was wrong. The girl waved her hands and said it was nothing. She just thought her hair was as shiny and beautiful as before. Jirika admitted that when she was a student, she kept wanting to touch it, and Chalk smiled, thanking her for the praise. But still she said that she shouldn't have done it. For the Mel, as the heiress of the blood of the gemstone people, she could only let other people touch her hair on very special occasions. Jirika assumed that by precious people, she meant a clan that had long been connected to spirits. Unless she was mistaken for having magical power in her hair, she wouldn't let other people touch it just for fun. Mel confirmed her words and said that she could only let people she recognized do that. And there was always a blessing on her shiny hair. A magical blessing was bestowed on the hair. If people tried to touch it, they would simply fail. And even if they tried to do it by force, they would be thrown back. Jirika realized that almost no one had touched Chalk hair before. Mel smiled and said that Jirika was right. Only those who had great magical power could break through the power of blessing, or those who were allowed by her heart. To touch them, she needed to constantly upgrade her alchemist skills. Even 100 heroes couldn't touch her hair that easily, and Jirika understood that very well. Therefore, she promised that she would work hard. Mel meanwhile looked at the documents and something surprised her. She came across a report about the simultaneous appearance of a miasma and a spirit. The girl assumed it was a report of yesterday's incident. Such an incident was quite curious, and the Chalk wanted to know how everything happened. The request said that there were senior spirits and monsters there, and fortunately no one was hurt. If the information had reached them a little faster, this breach would have been prevented. Mel felt sorry that the cooperation between the city and the university was still imperfect. Jirika replied that the system and tools they had come up with the 100 heroes were useful, but it took some time for everyone to adapt. Nevertheless, life became easier and safer because of it. The things created by the Chalk and heroes were very useful. The girl thanked Jirika for the praise, but the Chalk said that she had made most of them in the past, during her training with the teacher. The girl had learned a lot from her teacher, and Jirika suggested that it was since she was the apprentice of the Master of Heroes. So now that she was the president, already she had to be a master for others. Jirika grinned when she heard about the president's favorite and wanted to meet him too. Mel said that she was absolutely right, and she would also very much like to meet her master. Mel decided to concentrate on her work, but she was again interested in something in the report. It said that a certain TS Ranag had defeated a demonic beast and chased away a higher spirit. Mel didn't understand how this was possible, since a rank TS Ranag could not be a spirit mage. Besides, a senior spirit couldn't be banished so easily just by her or the head of security. Jirika told Chalk that her subordinates were talking about some rumors today. It was like there were horrible spirits and a wizard in the neighborhood. This meant that he most likely had strong magic skills. The headmaster thought that rank was acquired according to magical strength rather than physical strength, and it was not affected by talents or abilities. The girl smiled and decided that since he was that good, he needed to meet the others. Perhaps Chalky should have gone to the city sooner. Mel lifted another very urgent report with her hair, which was about the number of demonic beasts that were growing out of the miasma. Jirika smiled sadly and said that the hunger of the horned moles was a big problem. Yes, and the amount of alchemical materials has drastically decreased. In addition, they also eat the food of other monsters. For this reason, the demonic beasts will start looking for food, and the risk of encountering them will only increase. The intelligent demonic beasts would aim at people who could use magic, and the Chalk thought that they should have been more careful. But no matter what happened, the exchange of information between the city and the school should be more efficient. Jirika understood the president of the Chalk and suggested to make sure that next time the information would be received on time. A few days later, Ison and Rin were just walking around the city and sightseeing. It ended up turning out to be quite an adventure for them. While sightseeing, they were attacked by a demonic beast, which they handled quite easily. The protagonists then sold the magic stones to an alchemy company. All in all, they had a busy day. One morning, Rin and Ison were sitting on the first floor of the alchemy garden. The guy said that he had seen all the places that were mentioned in the letter. In that case, he suggested that Rin leave this town this afternoon, and the girl was fine with that. Rin wanted to say that she really liked it here and was curious to know where they would go next. The hero suggested that now they should have gone south this time. There are many small towns on the way to the big cities, so the roads should be good. Isekai'd clarified if Rin wanted to go to a particular place, but the girl smiled and replied that she wanted to go wherever her teacher wanted her to go. In that case, Isekai'd said that they would go to the south. The hero would like to stop by the university on the way to meet Chok-san if possible. He thought that the girl was very busy and might not have free time, but he thought it wouldn't be a big deal if they just saw how she was doing. Rin replied to the master that he was always worried about someone, and many people asked her why he was so strong and always very attentive to others and their problems. Isekai'd thought the girl was joking, but Rin always proudly answered them that that was what her teacher was like, and many said that explained everything. Isekai'd smiled and admitted that it would be nice to get along with everyone in town. Still, if they had decided everything, the boy offered to greet the Jurika. Besides, they had to get ready to leave, and Isekai'd asked Rina to be ready to see his student's face. The heroes approached the front desk of the alchemy garden. The man at the front desk realized that they wanted to see President Juriku. He had been asked to make a contract with the heroes earlier, so he asked the guys to wait for a while. In that case, Isekai'd suggested that Rina have another cup of tea, to which she happily agreed. When they sat down at the table, they were approached by a man who apologized for keeping them waiting. The hero recognized him as the man who used to come here with the Jurika. The man confirmed this and introduced himself as the president's secretary. The thing was that the president was currently on her way to the Magic University, and she would only be able to return tomorrow. The secretary was very sorry, but Isekai'd understood him perfectly. However, the secretary was told that he could come to the university if he had business, so if Isekai'd wished, the secretary could accompany them. The man smiled and apologized once more for the inconvenience they had caused. The hero thought that was great, since they were just about to go there. He hoped the secretary would guide them, and the man said he would be glad to help them. The doors were opened for them, and the man said a carriage was waiting for them outside. It would take less than an hour to get to the university. The hero was very grateful that they had prepared everything for them. The man admitted that preparing something like this was not much of an honor for the patrons of their president. Later, 3 girls entered the chalk room, apologized and introduced themselves as representatives of the student council. They said that the preparations for the evening course had been completed and the setting of the magic speaker was also perfect. Mel thanked them for their help and admitted that they had done it much faster than she had thought, and they still had time before the start. One of the girls replied that it had been quite a while since the president of 100 heroes had given her own lecture. There were already over 30 people in the auditorium, and she couldn't wait for it to start. Eureka smiled and told the president that she was still as popular as she was when she was a student. Mel was very happy that there were just as many pro-motivated kids now as there had been in the past. At that moment, a clerk knocked on the president's room and said he had a report from the guard tower. The captain of the university guard was already waiting, and the girl asked him to come in. The man reported that they had noticed a strange fluctuation of magical power on the plane in the southern part. However, they were unable to discern the details from the observation magic tool, and suggested that Chalky look at it herself. Mel thoughtfully walked to the window that looked south and decided to check it out. The man smiled slightly and said he would go back to the guards. There was a magical barrier around the university, and yet no abnormalities were detected. Mel didn't see it as a big deal since she could check it personally. The girl took her magic spear and pointed it upwards. She used magic detection and then applied the threat detection skill. A blob of blinding light flew out of the spear and flew out the window and into the distance. Mel told Jurika that if it was magic, they should be able to spot it with ease. Eureka looked at Chalk impressed. She had never seen a magic detector with such a range before. It was supposed to suck out a lot of magical energy, but she didn't see a trace of fatigue on the Chalk's face. The president's skills were certainly amazing. Mel smiled and said that during the war with the evil god, this kind of thing was one of her tasks, so now she could use it as a normal skill. Eureka thought that it was quite different from what the others of the 100 heroes used. It looked quite beautiful and clean, and Eureka could look at it forever. But the Chalk grinned and said that despite her skill being praised so much, apparently they didn't succeed. Meanwhile, someone's footprints began to appear in the expanse of the field, but their creator was nowhere to be seen. The mysterious transparent creature was slowly approaching towards the university. Even if Eureka said so, the detection range of Chalk magic was huge. Mel admitted that in normal detection ability her master was better than her, and Eureka realized that she was talking about the prophet. It was amazing to her that this person was stronger than the president. Mel confirmed this and said that in the end her master was able to hear the voices of everything around him as if he had eyes everywhere. Apparently he was some kind of amazing spiritualist, able to communicate with the earth and even plants. Mel grinned and replied that no matter how brilliant a spiritualist was, he couldn't communicate with the spirits of the earth or plants that he couldn't see. Eureka found this surprising, for even in an open field like the one on the outskirts of the pioneer city, they were unable to see or talk to lower class spirits. Mel confirmed that it was usually impossible. In addition, weak spirits are not even capable of speaking any language, so even those among the 100 heroes who could speak the language of spirits are not free to do something like that. Nevertheless, for a prophet to become proficient in speaking with spirits is quite possible. Eureka became clear, and she wanted to know about this person. Mel thought it was strange that the magic detection picked up something, but they didn't see anything. Her little balls of energy froze in one spot where the supposed invisible creature stood. Mel took a closer look and clarified if Eureka had seen it. Eureka also noticed some sort of magical reaction. The rustling grew stronger and stronger until small leaves began to form into someone's flesh. There was no way Mel expected them to see a Titan ogre here. Eureka was shocked when she heard about this ogre. It was a class of demonic beast, one with powerful regeneration and physical abilities. The girls didn't understand the reason why it was in a place like this, even if it was only detection data, but it was at least 4 meters tall. Even though the watchtower let him out of sight, he really did have an extremely huge body. It seemed to Mel that he originally hid his body and approached, but it was unclear to her what kind of magic he used. The principal asked her not to tell her that he was invisible. Eureka exclaimed that an evil god had similar power. It was magic that allowed the one using it to pass by unnoticed. Mel confirmed her hunch. It was a nasty magic that couldn't be detected without the simultaneous combination of detection and perception magic. Demonic beasts were not supposed to be able to use such spells. According to research, tyrant ogres were only capable of earth-type magic, but now this ogre was using invisibility, which was not common for them. He must have learned it somehow, for the miasmas did not only increase the demonic beast's power. Mel replied that when monsters ate the flesh of an evil god, the miasmas inside would eventually mix with their bodies, and some of them would eventually evolve, acquiring the magic or abilities of the evil god. In other words, she was saying that it was the demonic beast that evolved. Mel thought that this beast had cancelled invisibility, and it was like he knew he had been detected by their magic. He turned out to be an intelligent demonic beast. Mel was horrified to speculate that this ogre titan could possibly learn other spells from the flesh of an evil god. Meanwhile, the ogre formed and raised many sharp blocks of stone into the air, and used an evil crystal cannon. Huge stone crystals rained down on the building. One of them hit right through the window with the principal and Eureka, who jumped down to the ground. There was a huge explosion and the entire building began to collapse. Eureka coughed up from the puffs of dust that had risen and made sure the president was okay. Mel also wanted to make sure Eureka was okay, because after all, they had jumped from a pretty high place. The girl replied that she was fine, just a little sore in the leg. The president looked at their building and said that it was really sudden that he had such a powerful attack. Fortunately, this is her personal lab and there were very few people allowed in here. Besides, she had activated magic that would let her know when someone was coming inside. Luckily, she and Eureka were the only people that were here at the time of the attack. The girl wondered if any other buildings had been damaged. A guard ran up to them, wanting to make sure the principal was okay. Mel wanted to make sure they were already aware of the current situation. The girl knight said that she had already informed the guards of each sector, and currently 2 of their buildings had collapsed. To Mel's horror, the assembly hall next to the center was also destroyed. Mel immediately decided to make sure the students were safe. The guard replied that thanks to the protective chalk magic she had placed on the building, no one was hurt by the explosion. The students who couldn't escape were trapped under the rubble, but the rescue magic is active, so they definitely won't be crushed to death. This was good news for the chalk. To ensure that all students were protected, spells were cast on all university buildings. They became a shield in case of emergencies. They absorbed the impact if a student collided with them, and when children were trapped under rubble, the spell creates a shelter to help them survive. Mel put magic into buildings, incorporating them with the help of architects. However, the principal realized that if she did nothing now, it would become too dangerous, because the creature was going to eat them. The guard noticed that it was an ogre titan clad in miasma. Mel confirmed this and said that it had evolved, so it was now able to use the magic of an evil god. In addition, apparently he was hungry. There were quite a few people here, so it was likely that he had chosen this place as his feeding ground. The guard wanted to know how they should proceed at this moment. She was already ready to immediately relay orders to all the staff. In her hands, she held a magic item for short-distance communication. As long as they were inside the university, they would be able to use it to communicate. All the rank and file staff members needed to be in charge of rescuing and evacuating the students. The guards, on the other hand, needed to fight alongside the chalk to attract the attention of the Ogre Titan. Mel asked to broadcast a state of emergency to the Pioneer City. She asked to use magic beacons or letters to contact the powerful adventurers. For now, they were going to buy them some time and delay the monster. Mel approached Jurica and offered to help her save the students, for which she would be very grateful. Still, she could use alchemical medicine depending on the situation. But Jurica didn't want to leave Mel behind. After all, it would take at least 10 Ranka adventurers to subdue a normal Ogre Titan. And this one was stronger because of the absorbed miasma. Jurica realized that the chalk lacked people, and she was willing to fight alongside her. The president replied that Jurica had to use her abilities to save herself. The director wanted to prioritize the rescue operation and assured that they would be fine. Besides, the demonic beast wouldn't defeat them so easily. The girl knight said that the transmission was completed. Jurica understood it perfectly and promised to return as soon as possible after the evacuation of the students in her farewell. Mel agreed with her and thought she was imitating the master by showing off in front of her own student. She knew that Ogre Titans possess strong regeneration. Only when the core in its heart was destroyed would it stop regenerating. The ogre slowly came closer and once again prepared huge shards to attack. The rumbling and stomping of soldiers was heard. The female knight approached the chalk and told the president that the security squad was ready for battle. They needed to buy some time, so the chalk told the Ogre Titan that he would have to delay. On their way to the university, Isen along with Rin noticed puffs of smoke. Rin asked her master to pay attention to one thing. The smoke that was coming from the direction of the university was rising into the air. The secretary accompanying them said that it was smoke signal magic and it was simply impossible. Besides, he recognized its color. Isen questioned the secretary about what was wrong and suggested that they were in trouble. The agitated man explained that this smoke was signal magic used in case of an emergency. In addition, this color was used when the guards at the university couldn't handle a demonic beast. The secretary stopped their carriage. The man turned to the guys and wanted to ask something if possible. He wanted to go to the university right now, and it would be wise to turn back to ensure their safety. However, he had heard that they both held a very high position in the Pioneer City. Therefore, the secretary wanted them to go to the university to ensure the safety of the company president if possible. He wanted them to cooperate in order to solve the problem there. The secretary would like to save the president and the university where she had left many dear memories, and the secretary would like to borrow their power from them. The secretary bowed to the heroes and Isen smiled, thinking that he was really honest. He could have just kept silent and discreetly taken them to the university, but he didn't. The guy looked at the smiling Rin who felt the same as her master. The hero asked Mr. Secretary to raise his head, because he and Rin would love to help them. Besides, when their friend is in trouble, they were sure to cooperate with them, and the man thanked them sincerely for their help. He drove his horse forward and suggested that they should hurry. He warned them that they would be a little shaken and asked them to accept his apology. As their cart rushed forward, Isen thought that if they were late, it would all be pointless. He turned to the secretary and said that in that case they would leave first. The hero wanted to make sure that Rin was ready, and the girl said she had no problems. Isen said it would be faster for them if they walked from here, and Rin told the surprised secretary that they would leave their luggage in the carriage. The secretary rounded his eyes and asked the boys what they were going to do. At the same moment, the boys jumped out of the carriage. The hero asked the air to gently support them on the ground. After applying this magic, Rin and Isen landed on the ground and ran ahead of the carriage. Isen looked at his student with a smile and said that thanks to the wind, they would get there much faster. The secretary couldn't believe that the boys could use the tailwind, much less ride it. As they carried forward, Rin noticed that their emergency at the university continued. Isen noticed it too and suggested that Rin hurry up. Despite being rearguard adventurers, they were faster than the crew. The secretary was completely confused and could not understand what was going on. Meanwhile, Jurica asked to gather the wounded in the shelter at the school gate and inform the staff where the people under the rubble remained. At this point, she was in the Pioneer City, the campus branch of the Central Auditorium. Jurica found another student and promised to help him. Meanwhile, another person found the injured person. The man ran up to Jurica and said that he found the roster of students who were in the auditorium. It had signatures from the time of admission, so the numbers were accurate. The girl verified that there were 40 people in the auditorium. With that said, they had already saved 37 people. But at the same time, there were still 3 students under the rubble. Eureka realized that the president was now continuing to fight and climbed up on the rubble boards. She asked everyone to call back if they were conscious, but as the girl fought to her, no one responded. She assumed that the students had lost consciousness and perhaps they could not scream because of their injuries. Even if she tried to use magic detection to find them, it would fail. Since there are so many people around, she won't be able to distinguish those who are trapped from the others. Removing the debris, Eureka thought that a heroic level mage capable of such a thing just doesn't exist. Eureka realized that as long as there were students here who could escape, the president wouldn't be able to leave either. Eureka frowned and looked towards the battle. She knew that the president was not the best opponent for this demonic beast. The girl cleaned up the debris and thought about what she should do. She graduated from this university and created the best company in the city. Eureka thought she had grown a little because of that. Tears came to the girl's eyes. She thought that this was a rather pathetic situation. If she couldn't save the students, then in that case she wouldn't be able to save the master either. She grabbed the splinter and asked for someone to help her. Suddenly she heard someone's voice offering to help her. Eureka looked up and saw Isen and Rin on the rubble. The girl was surprised to meet him here and asked why they had arrived. Isen smiled and said that he had come here to meet a friend at this university, but they apparently had urgent business. The girl assumed that he could help them and decided to explain the whole situation. No sooner had she told about the ogre titan appearing at the university than Isen replied that everything was fine. He explained about the situation and said that he had already found out what was going on by listening to what was going on around him. Eureka didn't understand how he could know about everything just by listening. But the guy knew what had to be done and promised to save soon. The hero used his magic and listened around. He walked to a certain spot of debris and said it was here. The hero turned to the wind and asked it to lift this debris for him. As soon as the wreckage rose into the air, the affected man appeared out of it. The student was unconscious and naturally could not answer them. Isen approached the young guy and asked the lawyer to take care of him. The surprised girl thanked the hero for his help and approached the injured man. After that, the hero discovered the next student. He realized that everything was about to collapse, so he would have to act carefully. Isen slowly lifted the wreckage, where another injured girl turned out to be. Eureka was shocked that in such a short time, he had already discovered 2 students. She didn't see any spirits here, so she didn't think he used their power to find the students. Eureka wanted to ask the hero how he knew about where they were. Isen reminded her of what he had said earlier. He had heard voices that whispered to him that the children were right there, and they needed help. That voice was coming from a building that had been built to protect the students. Eureka didn't understand how he could hear the voices of simple things. Isen was surprised, for he thought he had said this earlier. In things that people create with care and love, there remains, though faint, a kind of emotion. Simply put, the hero understood the language of these emotions, and now it was telling him where the last student was. After that, Isen asked the wind to pick up the entire area that was in the wreckage. Everyone present was shocked as the debris rose upwards. They immediately saw the last disciple who was barely conscious. The disciple opened his eyes and saw a human figure in the light. It seemed to him that God himself was standing before him. But the hero smiled and said that he was not a god, but a man who had come to save him. The student smiled and agreed, whereupon he was helped. Eureka said that it was pretty incredible to find students so easily. She mentally thought that being able to communicate with objects was an ability that was beyond the capabilities of a spirit mage. The girl remembered the very linguist professional that the Chalk president had talked about. Eureka began to suspect who that person really was. Rin called out to her master and said that she had helped evacuate the students and now they were done. The boy thanked Rin and decided to move on to the next task. Eureka wanted to clarify what they meant by the next task. The guy smiled and said that now it was exactly his business and he had to go to his student Chalk. Meanwhile, the soldiers were desperately trying to contain the demon. The girl knight walked up to one of the soldiers and exclaimed that his shield was breached. She called out to the medical squad and asked them to take care of him as soon as possible. One of the soldiers wanted to stab his opponent in the leg, but the ogre threw him back and easily snapped his sword in half. The female soldier said that, with the exception of the president, all the members of the magic squad had been defeated by the last attack and only a few squads remained unharmed. Their forces were already clearly running low. Despite their best efforts, there wasn't a single scratch on the monster's body. Mel realized that it was its regeneration and thought that it was a rather unpleasant opponent. The ogre titan raised its arm and directed a vicious ice blast towards the girls. In response to his strike, the president used a combined fire spear. A fire seal in the shape of a circle appeared behind her back and fire spears flew out from there. The spears were numerous enough to repel all the splinters. The ogre was confused when he noticed that there were more of them and they broke through his attack. The chalk fire spears were able to hit the enemy, who covered himself with his hands from the following blows. But his scratches immediately healed and the demon began summoning its stone shards again. The president thought that they had only managed to make a small scratch on his forehead, but it was already healing and the battle could continue indefinitely. However, now they were buying time to get the students to safety. The knight exclaimed that he was attacking, but the president saw it perfectly well herself. The girls jumped to the sides, and Chalk wondered who he would chase after. Mel noticed that the creature used ice balls to shorten the distance between them. The monster aimed his blows at her, but the girl jumped back and fended them off again with her fire spears. She saw that he was preparing something, so she decided to increase the distance between them. Mel didn't expect the ogre to create a crystal baton so quickly in his hands and strike her. The blow was so strong that the girl could barely stand on her feet and her huge hat fell to the ground. Mel was alive only because of her shield, but was still able to continue. She could barely stay on her feet and waited for her opponent's next attack. The director assumed that she wouldn't be able to apply her shield in time and would likely have to take this attack head on. The demon shards were already flying towards her, and the girl only hoped that the students had time to evacuate. She never thought that she wouldn't be able to protect even herself and admitted that being president was really hard, but she still thought she did a pretty good job at it. The girl opened her eyes in shock and saw a staff in front of her that was thrust into the ground in front of her. A man's voice asked his weapon to unfold a defense for her, and the staff glowed. The girl covered herself with her hands from the attack, but she was protected by the staff's magical field. A guy came up to her and told her that she did a wonderful job protecting them until the very end. Mel raised her head and froze in place. The hero put his hand on her shoulder and said that she shouldn't have acted like him, because she had already reached great heights. The girl opened her mouth in surprise, not expecting to meet her master here. Ison smiled and recalled that it was quite a long time ago. Even though she lacked the firepower to fight head-on with a regenerating monster, she still did well. He helped the surprised girl to her feet and the chalk thought she was hallucinating. But the hero smiled and said that he was really here. The female knight wanted to make sure that the President Chalk was okay, but the girl smiled and said that everything was fine. The guy assumed that this girl was the squad leader and left the Mel for her. Rin shouted to the teacher that she was fully prepared to support him. In that case, Ison wanted to ask her to rescue the wounded and help with the evacuation. Rin agreed and asked to leave it to her. Besides, the Jurika-san in the rear is making medicine, and they will definitely protect everyone. Guy decided that the girls would handle the rescue and evacuation, and all they had to do was defeat the enemy. The hero approached the ogre titan and suggested that they get down to business. Earlier, his staff had protected him from the ice bullets the demon had fired earlier. Ison suggested that perhaps it was preparing larger ones, knowing that it looked like it was a savvy beast, in which case Ison would like to talk to it. He said it had been a long time since he had a proper conversation with his apprentice. He of course wanted to apologize for his words and asked the demon to get out of here. In response, the ogre got angry and roared at the boy. Apparently, this monster could not speak and Ison prepared for its attack, but he still knew what he had to do. The hero got into a fighting stance and told the ogre titan that he would teach him how to defeat it. The squad leader turned to the president and said it was too dangerous. She wanted to warn that the adventurous maid shouldn't have done that. But the chalk looked questioningly at the girl, not knowing what she was talking about. It seemed obvious to the girl that this man was a mage, for he was holding a staff. In that case, challenging the beast in close combat was suicide. But Chalk smiled and told her not to worry, for she was confident that everything would be fine. The president knew that it was not an easy staff. At the same moment the ogre swung his huge club, but Ison was able to stop the ogre's blow with his sword while holding his staff in his left hand. The boy smiled and told the ogre titan that he was too slow. The hero asked his body to speed up and used instant power. After that, he punched the ogre in the stomach and the monster was thrown back. The commander was shocked and didn't realize what kind of speed this was. After all, even if he strengthened his body with magic, this kind of technique and arm movement was beyond what one would expect in close combat. Nell smiled and said that it was of course true. She said with a smile that this person was a prophet and they learned magic and even hand-to-hand combat techniques from him. After all, the master was much stronger than them, the heroes. Ison swung his sword and stripped his opponent of his huge arm in one fell swoop. The demon pointed the remaining arm at Ison and still tried to use Ice Blast in the same way. The hero asked his arm to shred indiscriminately and used the Storm Strike technique. The shards that flew towards him were mangled into many small particles. Isekai'd instantly approached his opponent and chopped off his left arm. But the hero thought that wasn't the end of it and asked his body to accelerate more and more. The confused ogre could only follow the movements of the Iceman. The enraged beast wanted to bounce farther away in order to have time to recover. But the hero noticed that with the constant attacks, regeneration would not be able to fully restore everything. However, due to its massiveness, Isekai'd's attack didn't reach the point. But eventually, within a couple seconds, the ogre's arm grew back. The hero said that it was the piercing movement that was important for his attacks. The monster once again formed a huge crystal baton in his hand. Isekai'd took the sword in two hands and asked his body to accumulate more strength. The blade glowed and the guy asked it to chop without end. With those words, he swung at the attacking ogre. Isekai'd created a magic wave and applied a skill called Judgment of Fate. With a single swing of his sword, the ogre lost his club, which shattered into many small pieces. The magic wave instantly disemboweled the terrible ogre, who did not even realize it. The girls watched with rapt attention the battle of the terrible ogre Titan and Iceman. The monster's body split exactly in half, after which the body fell to the ground with a rumble. The boy put the sword away in its scabbard and the chalk headed towards her teacher. This was exactly what she expected from her master. No one would have thought that the hero would be able to handle the ogre with such ease. But the guy thought she was the one who bought enough time to save the students, and that was an amazing feat. Mel got embarrassed and told her master that he was obviously overpraising her. But the hero thought that this was not true at all, because in the end she achieved her goal and protected her students. Mel realized that his teacher was always like that. He always praised her after she did a good job. For this reason, they were all attached to him like spoiled children to their parents. Mel remembered her training with her teacher and thought it had always been like that. Mel blushed with embarrassment, for she knew it might have been a little selfish because he had saved her. But she really wished the teacher would praise her like he had before. Isekai'd managed to forget about it, but then he remembered what she meant and reached out his hand to the chalk. He stroked the happy girl's head and clarified that this was what she meant. Mel tilted her head toward her master and said that this was exactly what she wanted. She would always want her master to praise her in this way. The soldiers present could not believe their eyes. No one thought that there was a person who was allowed to touch the president's hair, and it seemed quite unbelievable to them. No one realized who this person was. Mel put her hand on the guy's shoulder and thanked the master, for she felt better now. The hero was happy about this and assumed that Mel would be fine without medical help. But Mel had already been given first aid, so she was fine. Besides, the girl had something to tell her master. There were many things she wanted to tell him, but there was something she decided to say upon his return. Mel congratulated her master on his return home and told him that they had done their best to rebuild this world, waiting for his return. Guy smiled and said that he was home now and thanks to all of them he could see this fun world. The next day, the global guild was quite noisy. A party was thrown in the guild's tavern to celebrate the victory over the demon. The admin girl suggested that the Magic University and the Pioneer City would also be in danger, so it was necessary to reward those who stopped the attack. From the Titan ogre that grew into a miasm, the university collected a lot of materials and received a huge amount of funds. They were used to rebuild the university, also to give a banquet to reward the security members who risked their lives. The celebrations in the Pioneer City continued for several days, and when the festivities were over and the city returned to its usual pace, Isekai'd and Rin finished their preparations to leave and drove to the southern area of the city in the early morning. Mel was disappointed that they were already leaving, for she had not yet thanked Isekai'd for his help. But the hero refused and said that he had already gotten enough, and now he had enough useful items to fill his magic bag. But the president wished they could stay here for a while longer and relax a little. Mel had a lot of things to tell her teacher, and she had just as much fun chatting with Rin-chan. Rin thanked Mel and said that she was also happy to chat with her. Mel had already heard about their current situation. Mel admitted that she was very surprised to see that her master hadn't aged at all, and he even looked even younger. The hero replied that it was all thanks to the former spirit emperor in which he healed him. The fact was that they had many paintings of the master in existence, but since most painted him as an old man, few people remembered his former appearance. Yes, and there were quite a few people named Isekai'd named after the war hero. The girl thought that Isekai'd as a prophet would be welcomed in every city he visited, but with his current appearance he probably wouldn't be recognized. The hero was fine with that and said that wasn't his purpose. He would just like to see the world as his beautiful disciples had restored it and enriched it. The principal thought this was amazing and she hoped it was true. The hero asked her not to be so modest, for she was also one of his wonderful students. Isekai'd was glad that after coming out of the spirit world he visited the first place, because thanks to them he was able to see a lot of interesting things. Mal was happy to hear this from her master, but the girl really didn't think she had thanked him enough and asked him to take one thing with him. The hero took a small token and asked what it was. It was a certificate from the president of the University of Magic. It was issued to the representative of her organization and it could help him gain people's trust. Thus, it guaranteed his status as an adventurer. Thanks to it, he would have the right to enter any places she could enter as well, which was most of the southern cities. Isekai'd didn't realize that this certificate had such power and made sure she was sure of it. But Chalk didn't doubt her decision. In fact, she wondered if it was okay for her to act as a guarantor since the master was much stronger than her. Nevertheless, she was glad that her status could be of some use to him, even if only a little. Isekai'd thanked the Chalk and promised to use it with caution. Chalk wondered where they were going next, and the hero replied that they would be traveling to the south. According to the letter, another of his students lives in the market town behind the inn. The girl warned that if he found out the fact that the master was coming to him, he would raise a ruckus and it was better not to contact him beforehand. The hero thought so too, although it would be great if they were received quietly. In general, it didn't matter so much whether he knew that Isekai'd was coming or not. It was just that the hero didn't want to cause trouble for his students. Mel smiled and noticed that the master was really attentive. She promised that she would help them travel incognito as well. She asked everyone at the university who knew his real identity to keep it a secret. She also wanted to do something funny for the king who loved to fool around. Jurica came up to them and apologized. At the victory celebration, she heard that Isekai'd was going to the trading city and asked her to take this letter of introduction with her. She handed the envelope to Isekai'd with a smile. She thought he should have shown it to him in the company of the Kododaram. The thing was, the local representative was an acquaintance of hers. He would know from the magic wax that the letter was from her. Besides, only he would be the only one who could open that envelope. In the letter, she explained about him being an Icenian prophet, and she also asked them not to make a fuss about it. Eureka hoped that there was nothing wrong with it, and the Isekai'd thanked her for her help, saying that she had been very kind to him. Eureka replied that he had always helped her, so she wished she could do something for him in return. Mel shook Rinna's hand and said that she trusted the teacher to her. The girl agreed with Mel and asked her to rely on her. Jurica and Mel waved goodbye and wished them a good trip. Jurica suggested that they should meet again sometime. Rin waved goodbye and thanked them for their concern. Thus, the two of them left the pioneer city of Sagittal and headed south. No one knew what would happen to the protagonists next. In the new world, they were eager to meet their disciples. The protagonists were half a day away from the city of Sagittal. Isekai'd thought it would take much longer to walk, but the time flew by because of the beauty of the scenery. The hero was thrilled that things had changed so much since he left. Rina agreed with him, and because of the beautiful road, she wasn't the least bit tired either. They arrived at the post town. There were only a couple of inns and stores. Isekai'd thought of one of his students who wrote to him that being able to travel freely and comfortably was very important in their time, so he focused on improving the roads. Isekai'd noticed that the roads here were really good. The sun was still high and the hero thought it was possible to continue their journey. The guy told Ryan that if they walked a little more, there would be a trading year ahead, and he was thinking how they could best get there. Ryan didn't think they had any other options but to walk. Isekai'd smiled and said that one of his students wrote that he was selling wagons and had a branch in different postal towns. A few years ago, he said in a letter that he was starting his own business, and that his company also provided rental services. Therefore, it seemed to the hero that he also had a branch in this town. Eureka said that for the sake of people doing business in trading towns and wanting to sell goods outside of them, branches with wagon rentals were opened in small postal towns. Even as experienced adventurers, they could rent a wagon for a certain fee. Even though the hero wanted to walk more, the guy decided to ask Rinya's opinion and said that they could take the wagon if she was tired. The girl thanked him for his concern, but of course she would like to walk with the teacher. She clenched her fist and showed that she wasn't tired at all. Besides, his training had hardened her so much that getting tired from simple walks was simply impossible for her now. Also, Rina thought that it would just be more fun for them to walk together with the teacher, and the guy laughed. In that case, he decided that they would walk. The only thing he wanted to see with his own eyes was the branch opened by his student. The hero was going to go there and Rinya agreed to walk with him. The guys walked to a small village where they entered the wagon rental building. The doors of the building creaked open and a man greeted his guests. Isekai'd looked at the contract board and marveled that they were still available for rent. The man apologized and said that all the wagons had already been reserved, but the hero replied that there was nothing wrong with that, as he just wanted to see their store. The hero also said that they would reach the market town on foot, and the man was surprised. He warned the boys that it would take a whole day and advised them to buy a tent. Isekai'd thanked him and said that they already had one, and the man assumed that they were travelers. The salesman said that in their time it was rare to find adventurers who were not subject to any organization, especially at their age, and admitted that they were very brave fellows. The hero laughed and thanked the salesman. He also asked if their store was really always such a success. He thought to himself that the student's letter had said that there weren't many customers yet, but he would like to fix that in time. The man replied that business was booming here, unlike in other cities. Their store was located near a developing commercial town. However, such a dense reservation had not appeared here very long ago. The hero assumed that the demand grew according to the development of the trading cities. Rina thought that they would need to visit the neighboring towns and follow their development. Isekai'd thanked her for the information and apologized for the trouble. The man smiled and wished them good travels. After that, they left the building and the hero thought about what to say to Rina. The atmosphere there was really nice and his student made great company. Rina was in complete agreement with his teacher. Thanks to his teaching methods, he was able to understand the importance of building good relationships with customers, and so it was also a credit to Isekai'd. Isekai'd laughed and said that it was not because of his teacher that he was able to start a great company. It was only because of the excellent abilities of his students, and he was very proud of them. So the hero suggested that they continue their journey after a short break at a coffee shop. Rin gladly agreed and said that one of the delights of traveling is to have lunch with her teacher, and hurried ahead. They ordered a very tasty omelette. There were also many good cafes here and the egg dishes in them were excellent. Isekai'd thought that it would take about one day to walk to the nearest market town, but if they took a short jog, they could get there before dusk. Of course, the hero would like to take a walk under the starry sky, but it would be better if they got there before dark and hoped that Rina was okay with that. The girl, of course, agreed. After their rest, the protagonists set off and on their way met a wagon. The wagon was stopped and a certain man was trying to mount a horse with a horn on its head. Apparently, it was not even going to get up. Isekai'd and Ryan decided to stop and ask what was wrong. A young guy with glasses apologized for blocking their way. The hero asked not to worry about it and assumed that their wagon had broken down. He warned that it was dangerous to stop here for a guy knew that. The thing was, their unicorn couldn't budge, so they weren't going. The guy was a merchant, so there was no way he could drop his load, and in all likelihood they would be stuck here for a while. He asked his partner to reach the town and call for help, but it would take at least a day. Besides, it was a bit scary to leave the wagon unattended. Isekai'd looked at the unicorn and smiled. It was quite a peaceful magical beast, and they were much more durable than ordinary horses, though the hero noticed that it wasn't in the best condition. The merchant thought he had eaten some poisonous grass, so he had to give him an antidote, but nothing changed. The boy hesitated and asked for permission to look at him. Isekai'd knelt down, touched the horse's muzzle and asked for permission to talk to him. He heard the unicorn's voice saying that he could not move, for his right hind leg was numb. The unicorn did not understand why he could not move. Besides, he really wanted to help his master, but he could not. The merchant gave a surprised look at the guy who understood the whole situation. Isekai'd approached the unicorn's hind right leg. He examined it and realized what was wrong. The hero carefully took out a small needle that was sticking out of its leg. The unicorn immediately trembled and quickly rose to its feet. The boy showed the merchant the needle and said that the thing had stuck in his leg. Apparently, it was the needle of a poisonous hedgehog. Its needles continued to inject poison even when it was outside the body. Now that he had pulled it out, it was possible to re-give him the antidote. The merchant smiled and said he had no problem with that and thanked the guy for his help. He replied that they hadn't traveled very far from the post town and they hadn't encountered any such urchins along the way. Apparently, someone had set it up, since the poison was quite potent. Thinking about it, Isekai'd threw the needle away. Merchants were often attacked by their competitors and common bandits, but the merchant still didn't understand who would want to do this. With these thoughts, he poured the medicine into a bowl and gave it to the unicorn. The merchant told the hero that he had given him the antidote and it wouldn't be long before he regained his strength. He once again thanked the heroes for their help. He didn't expect that such a problem could be spotted at a glance, and realized that the Isekai'd could use the spiritual magic of words. The hero was impressed that this guy knew about this kind of magic. The merchant agreed with him and said that his colleagues use it periodically. Spiritual word magic and prophecy magic are slightly different, but spiritual word magic sounded better, and the hero decided to call it that from now on. The merchant admitted that it was the first time he had seen this way of using this magic. but it didn't seem to the hero that it was anything special. The merchant wouldn't say so, for his familiars usually controlled beasts through elemental magic. But when they listened to the conversation between the two creatures, there were many things they didn't understand, so it was quite difficult for them to dialogue as well. Isekai'd was surprised that there could be such a thing, so the merchant wondered how he could get the unicorn to tell him that he was in pain. The boy smiled and replied that he had just met many different creatures along the way, and had somehow come to understand them. During the war, he had many times had to spiritually communicate with people unable to speak because of terrible wounds, and this experience probably developed his abilities. The unicorn fixed the hero's hair with its lips and Isekai'd laughed. He could see that he felt much better. The merchant was delighted, for his unicorn had suffered not so long ago, and was grateful to the heroes for their help. In that case, they could now continue on their way, and the merchant decided to check things out. It seemed to him that it would not work, and thought that a repairman was not to be avoided here. The hero decided to see what was the matter, and asked the wagon to tell him its condition. He touched the thing with his hand to hear it. After a moment, the hero realized what the matter was and leaned toward the axle of the wheels. There was some sort of thing stuck into it that looked like a piece of metal. It had a thin layer of some kind of liquid on it. Rina thought it was a magic potion. Isekai'd also recognized the potion that restricted movement. The merchant didn't understand how it got there from the luggage, and it was probably a rival's prank. The merchant was happy that his wagon could now go forward and thanked the strangers again. He assumed that the heroes were pretty good with technology. He had heard that to use the spiritual magic of words on inanimate objects you needed to know a lot about it. It was said that things that were cared for possessed a soul, and this wagon had one. The wagon understood the reason why it couldn't move, and Isekai'd just listened to it. The merchant was embarrassed and admitted that it was simply unfathomable to him. Perhaps the reason was only because he really cared for her a lot. It seemed to Isekai'd that there were no more problems, and in all likelihood they would continue on their way. The hero was very happy for them and asked them to be careful on their way. The merchant assumed that they were heading to the trading town on foot. It was a long way to get there. They had spent a lot of time helping him, and the merchant would like to offer to go along with him, for he was just on his way to the same place. Isekai'd made sure he didn't mind, but the merchant was only too happy to help them. He couldn't thank them in any way right now, so he would be very happy if he could just let them down. The hero thought that such a chance didn't come often and looked towards Rina. The girl smiled and said that the decision was up to the teacher, since she was okay with it. The hero decided to take advantage of this offer and asked to know his name. He also introduced himself along with Rin. The merchant smiled and said that they were a little late in introducing themselves and gave his name as Ro. He belonged to one of the companies in the trading city and his full name was Ro Harbra. Ro asked to be comfortably seated in his carriage. After traveling some distance, the hero noticed that they were traveling at a fairly high speed, despite the fact that they had a lot of cargo. The merchant replied that it was their company's wagon. Both horse and cart were first class. The merchant was very happy that thanks to them the breakdown had been fixed. He had already begun to think of renting a wagon from the post town, but he wasn't allowed to leave his cargo there. The hero thought that he had made the right choice by staying put, especially since the wagons in the post town were already booked. The merchant smiled and said he was very lucky to meet them. But the lad replied that the help had been his whim, and he was very glad that the Ru was pleased with the result. The hero thought his unicorn was especially lucky, but Ro didn't understand why. The fact was that it was at a difficult moment that he was by his side and tried to comfort him, and the unicorn was very grateful to him for that. Ro was embarrassed by Isekai'd's words and blushed. The merchant said that the unicorn was always with him during training and it was a great horse. There was no way he would want to leave it alone. The hero said that when he talked to him, it was clear that he trusted him a lot. Ro was very happy about this and said that horses were companions of the traders, although he considered his unicorn a full-fledged companion and he treasured him very much. The horse snorted approvingly and the merchant thanked him for this conversation. He warned that it was still a long way to the trading city, but he felt more comfortable since the protagonists rode along with him. They can reach the city before it gets dark and the magical beasts come out of the forest, so they could relax and enjoy the ride. The guy smiled and said that they would. He asked them not to be shy and to speak up if the merchant suddenly needed help. Apparently, because of the delay, the road was clear of foot travelers and other wagons. At this rate, Ro thought they would make it before dark. Meanwhile, the sun was slowly beginning to set. Their wagon moved forward quickly with a rumble until it hit an obstacle. It was an overturned wagon that had apparently hit a tree. The coachman and horse were not to be seen, and the boys assumed that they had gone off to get help. The peddler noticed that they were blocking half the road, but if they shifted a little to the side, they could get through. They needed to slow their speed a little, but just as they passed a fallen wagon, a masked man came out of it. He jumped onto the hero's wagon and swung his knife at the Roo. The merchant quickly realized it was an outlaw and kicked about the horse. The wagon tilted sideways and went forward quickly, and the brigand did not have time to grab onto it. The mysterious masked man said he was pretty good and grinned. He didn't expect anything else from a merchant who was entrusted with a wagon bearing the company's emblem. Ro realized that he was no match for him and needed to get on their way faster. But for some reason his unicorn fell to his feet again and Ro went down. He approached the horse to see what was the matter and noticed the same poison spikes on the unicorn's rump. The rogue replied that this time it was an accelerated poison, and even if he gave the horse an antidote, it would not be able to get up as fast. The Roo had no doubt that he was the one who had poisoned the unicorn from the beginning. When everything was ready, the outlaw asked his boys to come out. The horse was stopped, and that was the end of his work here. The outlaw threw out the remaining poison thorns and motioned for the lads to get on. The man with the ponytail told the boss that today, however, was a great catch as always. The other man grinned and replied that the poison was a great idea. The outlaw with the bandage on his forehead was sure that Ro's wagon was just full of all sorts of expensive junk and asked for everything he had to be delivered. He threatened that they would take the horse, the goods, and even his life. The trader had already realized that there was probably no way to negotiate with them. The bandits confirmed this, for he had already thwarted them once. The robber ordered the merchant to die and threw a dagger at him. At the same moment the Roo realized that he would not have time to dodge it. Meanwhile, the hero asked the wind to heed his words and protect the merchant. A wind wall appeared in front of the merchant and reflected the dagger. The bandits did not understand what was the matter, and the hero suggested that their situation had become heated. He pointed his staff at the bandits and said that they were bandits who were useless to talk to. Isekai'd smirked and told the surprised Roo that they would deal with them themselves next. The bandit who threw the dagger drew his sword and asked the guy who he was. One of the bandits noticed the staff in his hands and assumed he was the mage accompanying the wagon. But he wasn't there when they left the post town, and had apparently been hired on the way. Rina stared at the bandits and asked the teacher what they would do. One of the men marveled at what a beauty they had with them. On top of that, she was an elf. They immediately thought that they would get a lot of money for such a thing on the black market, and could only thank the guys for the gift. The hero realized that the bandits still did not change their traditions and engaged in human trafficking. Isekai'd raised his hand and said he would only ask them for one thing. The bandit laughed and told the wretched sorcerer that they would take pity on him only if he would lay down his arms and let them have a good torture on their bodies. The hero smiled and said he wasn't going to ask for that and offered to surrender to the city guard right now. Silence fell for a moment and the bandit with the bandage grinned and spat on the ground. He laughed and remarked that those were excellent last words. All the other brigands supported him with laughter and admitted that the sorcerer was a real joker. The brigand said that in that case their talk was over, and in gratitude for making them laugh, he would receive a quick death. The brigands seized their weapons and pounced on the hero. The boy realized that they did not want to surrender, and then he had no other choice. The men thought it was funny that he still wanted to conjure, and thought this mage was a pretty desperate kid. They exclaimed to him that Isekai'd wouldn't even have time to cast a spell and pointed their swords at him. But the hero only swung his staff and struck each of the attackers. One of the bandits fell at his feet. The man who had earlier threatened the hero froze in place from surprise and did not understand what was going on. His partner also looked at the hero in surprise. It seemed to the bandit that he did not use magic at all, and he did not even have time to follow his movements. The hero grasped the staff with both hands and used acceleration magic. No one even had time to follow him, and meanwhile, Isekai'd ran up to each brigand and struck them one after another. The bandits were confused and didn't understand what was wrong with the guy and how he was doing it. The leader called his partner names and ordered him to keep his temper. The man with the blindfold suggested that they just pick a different target, and the partner understood him. They decided they would take the girl hostage. Rin frowned when she heard about the fact that they wanted to take her hostage. She calmly followed the brigand that ran up to her and held out his hand. But the girl dodged to the side and pulled out her dagger, which plunged straight into the brigand's leg. The man screamed in pain and couldn't understand what was happening. Rin asked him not to think about the fact that she would let his filthy hands touch her and use the electric blade. A charge emerged from the blade and pierced the man's entire body. As the brigand fell to the ground, Rin told her teacher that she was done. The boy smiled and told her that he had dealt with them too. In the end, only the last one was left. It was the same man who talked and threatened Isekai'd with death. He refused to believe it and yelled that the mages couldn't be that strong and asked for answers as to who they were. The hero approached him as quickly as possible and said that they were just ordinary adventurers now. With those words, he struck the man right in the man's face with his staff. The robber fell to the ground and Isekai'd smiled, saying that their robbery had failed and they would be handed over to the guards on duty. When the protagonists had knocked out all the robbers, they tied them up and put them in the carriage. Ro smiled embarrassedly and said that they had saved him again and he needed to thank them again for their help. But the hero asked not to worry about that, weight couldn't hurt them either. Ro suspected that Isekai'd and Rin were not simple adventurers, and the latest event only confirmed his speculation. Nevertheless, he still had a hard time believing it, but they did have great power. Isekai'd replied that he had tied up the robbers properly by putting some magic into the rope, and they would turn them into the guards of the trading city. Ro agreed with them and said that the horse was fine, so they could move on soon. The merchant asked for permission to thank them properly once they arrived in town, and the hero was fine with that. He asked them to be careful on the road, for it was getting dark. The sun had almost set over the horizon and their carriage pulled up to the trading town of Olians. When the guards saw the bandits, they said that it was without a doubt the band that had been rampaging around the city. They had been using a special poison lately, so they were quite adept at robbing wagons. Reproducing their memories was enough to prove their guilt, and due to the intense development of the city, faster ways of establishing guilt began to appear. Rina and Isekai'd received a cash reward, which the girl was delighted with. The hero had already forgotten that such a reward was given for cooperating with the guards. The merchant replied to them that this was the policy of the city mayor and his deputy. Since it was possible to increase public safety with money, it was best to take such measures. Rin said that they could use the money to live in a hotel for a few days, and the security personnel also said that they could take a nice walk with it. The guy smiled and said that there was no extra money, so they would gladly accept the reward. They were approached by a man who was glad to see that Ro was already back. He was rather surprised when the guards told him that he had arrived in the city. After all, he still hadn't even had time to send repairmen to him yet. Ro greeted David and told him that he actually had help. David had already inadvertently overheard the guards and learned that he had met the adventurers who had repaired the wagon and dealt with the robbers. He admitted that such tough guys made him want to meet in person. He looked at the young guys and assumed it was them. Ro corrected his glasses, smiled, and said they were just incredible guys. David bowed to the surprised heroes and apologized for being so late. He was thankful from the bottom of his heart to them for saving his comrade and his companion horse. He personally introduced himself and said that he would do everything in his power to repay them this debt. The fellow replied that in any similar situation he would have done the same, so there was no need to thank them so zealously. David laughed and said that whatever the reason was, he couldn't rest until he thanked them properly. Ro confirmed this and replied that until they paid them back they could not consider themselves good merchants. The merchant heard that they planned to stay here for a while, and clarified whether they had decided on a place to stay. David told the boys that he had already prepared accommodation for them. It was a huge apartment on the main street and, naturally, everything had already been paid for. The merchant praised David and said he had done everything on time. Ro hoped that Isekai'd and Rin would like to stay there without worrying about payment, and Isekai'd was fine with that. He thanked the guys and gladly agreed, as it wasn't every day they were offered to stay in a great apartment. David thought it was marvelous that they had thought of booking everything at once, and Ro agreed with him. But David felt that this was not enough to thank them for saving their lives, but they had not yet had time to do anything more than that. So it would be good for them if the heroes would give them some more time. Also, as a small addition, they wanted to offer to have dinner with them, naturally at their expense. Isekai'd glanced at Rin and asked her opinion. Ro knew a great place and told David that they should have booked it. But the man already knew about it and assumed that would be the case, so he booked in advance. Along the way, the group of heroes chatted incessantly. Isekai'd admitted that he would like to leave his things at the hotel and walk around the city a bit, and Ro replied that in that case they would do so. He offered to escort them. When they entered their apartment, Ro asked the boys to make themselves at home. They were going to leave them at that and said that they would meet in 2 hours. The restaurant was not far from here, so they would be waiting for them at the hotel entrance. Rinya's eyes sparkled with excitement. There was a rather spacious room here and several sleeping places. Also, even a bathroom was present here. The hero offered to leave his things here and walk around the neighborhood. After that, the heroes went for a walk around the evening city, which was quite lively and noisy. Isekai'd smiled and said that even at night the whole place was quite bright and lively. Rina noticed something and suggested her teacher to take a look at it. She pointed to a juice stand. The market town brought fruits from different places, so she thought it was worth trying the mix. The hero didn't mind and also wanted to try one juice. It seems that the tower that was used for observation during the war was open to the public, and Isekai'd suggested the girl to go there. Rin gladly agreed. When they climbed to the very top in the tower, a beautiful night city opened up in front of them. The boy was delighted and said that this city was bigger than he remembered it. Years ago, the area of the trading city was surrounded by high walls, so you could tell how much the city had expanded by the number of buildings behind the wall. The girl realized the reason why the teacher was looking at the map of the city in the inn with such astonishment. The hero suggested that we go down and walk around the new parts of the city. Ro told her that the area outside the wall was mostly residential and commercial areas. That meant that the area outside the wall would be in good condition. They reached a place that appeared to be an undeveloped area. There was a sign on the lawn. It said for people to be careful, for the area was a future development and it was the property of the city hall. It was as if the city was continuously expanding. Ison was pleased to see the development of the infrastructure himself. Through the students' letters, the feeling is conveyed much worse. Ison noticed that his staff was glowing and Ryan asked his teacher about it. It only meant that he had left some of his magic here somewhere. Ison didn't realize this place would end up here. They walked across the lawn towards the forest and the staff glowed even more. It looked like it was somewhere nearby. That place turned out to be a tree, and the hero removed the seal from it. A leaf formed out of the bright light, and it entered his book. The hero received a level 2 magic power enhancement skill. He had already forgotten that he had left his magic here. The thing was that he tried to choose deserted places far away from cities to seal his magic. However, the hero had no idea that the Oleans would grow so large. It was still great to see the result of his students' work, and they were lucky that he was able to find a shard of sealed magic during this walk. Rin had the impression that he had seen this coming. She didn't expect anything less from her teacher who could see the future. The hero smiled and said that it just happened. This town was filled with pleasant surprises. The guy suggested moving towards the inn, and Rin noticed that it was already time. She wondered where the guys would lead them. It seemed like Ro and his friend had said they wanted to take them to a restaurant called the White Cat House, and she was already excited. David asked to eat and drink as much as his soul desired. Besides, it was all on him. He ordered only the most popular dishes for the guys. Besides, it was the best restaurant in the shopping city, and David wanted them to enjoy the food. The hero thanked David, and Rina said they would. In addition to the food, there were also live performances to enjoy here. There is often dancing and singing, and sometimes acrobats also performed here. The whole show was absolutely free. Ro clarified that they had reserved a special table. Apart from the stage on the first floor, the main backstage area was perfectly visible from here. It was connected to the one downstairs, so the performers would go right out here. True, it was forbidden to touch them, but it was possible to reorder a favorite tune. The hero understood everything and recognized that this was a great place. Besides, today there was a professional artist of incredible level, a singer and an acrobat. She was perfectly skilled in theater and many musical instruments. Ro had no doubt that they would definitely enjoy her performance. A melody from the violin was heard and Ro thought her performance had already begun. The musician herself was not visible, but Ison already liked the melody. He took up the food and said it was very tasty. Ryan tasted a bite and said he was right. There was quite a lot of fragrant seasonings, so the smell was incredible as well. Rina would like to see what it was cooked with. Ro clarified with the girl if she liked to cook, and Rin said that she liked to cook for her teacher. It was like her teacher also liked the food here and Ison was supportive of them. David was also happy about it. Many famous chefs gathered in the trading city and prepared dishes with unusual ingredients brought from different cities. Therefore, it was very delicious everywhere here. David suggested that the boys eat to their health. They wanted on behalf of their company to try their best to please them. The hero was surprised at such an unusual name and queried about it. Ison assumed that it was a huge company from a trading city. Ro recalled that they had not yet talked about being its creators. David the word spirit mage and Ro the merchant had discovered it together. It has been a long time since its inception and they have been able to gather a lot of professionals from them. Because of this, their company provides a huge range of services from business counseling to blacksmithing and support. Therefore, there is a job for them in almost every city. Earlier they said that they were colleagues, but the hero did not even realize that they were the creators of this company. Ro replied that he and David had different professions, but strangely enough, they were able to work together. Just as David had thought, they had saved Ro without even knowing that he was the boss of the company. The guy confirmed that they only found out about it now. Now that David found out about it, he was even more grateful to them for their help. Ro told the guys that they were very grateful for their kindness and unselfishness. It turns out that they already knew the name of their company, and that it was pretty big. Ison replied that an acquaintance of his, whose name was Jurica, worked for them. The guys were surprised to hear this name from Isekai'd. Ro clarified that he was talking about the head of the alchemist's garden. The hero remembered that he kept the letter she had written and held out the envelope with Ro's seal. He said that they could also check that seal. Ro said that Jurica was their friend who helped him a lot with the development of the company. David noticed the magic seal that only she could make, and it seemed that they were indeed acquainted. The man asked not to think that he suspected them of anything. Ro and David's faces were quite amused as they read this letter. At first they read its lines with a smile and calmness, but then their shocked gaze shifted to iceness, and then back to the letter. Ro covered himself in droplets of sweat and clarified about what was written in the letter. They wanted to make sure it was true, and that he was the prophet Isekai'd, the master of 100 heroes. The boy replied that it was indeed true. He didn't think those two would know about him. It was quite a surprise for the guys. They did not expect to meet the very man about whom legends are made. David said that musicians even wrote songs about them. Ro admitted that he thought the prophet would be a deep old man, and perhaps there was some magic to hide his age. On the whole, it could be said as well. Isekai'd had lived for quite some time in a place where time was slowed down. He was curious to know when legends began to be written about him. Ro corrected his glasses and said that he was naturally very famous, though he didn't know the details, but he had certainly heard a lot about him. David admitted that they had taken him aback, and Jurica certainly wouldn't lie to them. There was no way he could have thought that the legendary sage would dare to stroll through their world, just like a secret agent. The boys hesitated, and Ro decided to check with David to see if that was a possibility. David smiled at his partner and said that he had thought about it too. Hiro didn't understand what they were talking about and asked about it. Ro replied that the artist they were talking about earlier very rarely visits this town, because she is too famous and talented for such a backwater. But she was the very girl of the 100 heroes. The hero was surprised by this and looked at the stage where the backstage was just opening. The girl felt her heart hammering with nostalgia again and thought that this just couldn't be. She clutched the violin in her hands and prepared to leave. Everyone was shocked when the famous artist ran out of the backstage area and tore towards the guy. Just as she thought, the hero came back to them. She ran up to her favorite teacher with all her legs and threw herself into his arms. The boy smiled and said that he was just thinking that he had heard that tune somewhere before. It was as if he felt that it was played by the Fela. The girl said that it was natural since his favorite student was performing in front of a beautiful master. Ro opened his mouth in amazement and couldn't believe his eyes. One of the 100 heroes walked up to them without even thinking for a second. They were very lucky that their table was in a special area hidden from prying eyes, so her coming out wouldn't raise a fuss. Fela was reluctant to let the teacher go and said she wanted to see him again very much. No one would have thought that Fela Dulam herself would be a top-level professional musician. Although as far as the hero could remember, she always seemed very calm and quiet. The girl leaned against his chest and heard the pounding of his heart. She confessed that when she heard it, she felt calm and warm, and that was true happiness for her. David thought she looked more modest and sophisticated at her performances. Ro smiled and thought that their thoughts with David coincided. Fela, as if only now, noticed them. She apologized for it, for she couldn't help herself. Besides, there was no way she could be a nerd in front of the teacher. The character apologized for the fact that the Fela might have scared them. It was just that she was very emotional, so it happened quite often. The girl was thrilled that the teacher still remembered her name, but Isekai'd didn't understand how he could forget his student's name. Fela leaned against the master again and said that she was so happy that this moment was in her top 5 happy moments in life. Of course, the top 3 included all those moments when he praised her, but perhaps she would put today in there as well. Rina felt uncomfortable, but she still decided to ask the teacher what the enthusiastic girl's name was. The hero introduced Rina to Fela Dulam. She was the same student who liked to make people smile. Fela looked at Rin and felt an aura of love for her teacher from her. She assumed that Rin was also one of his students. The girl introduced herself and said that she was also one of his students. She was the most recent of those whom the master had taken as disciples. As Fela thought, she was the Rin who sometimes answered letters in place of the master. Some of the letters also mentioned her name and Rin confirmed this. The girl was delighted and said that Rin was then her younger sister. Fela admitted that she looked even cuter and that she were in love with the same person. Because of this they could already be called friends, and Fela offered the girl friendship. Ryan gladly accepted and said that it was a pleasure to meet her. Ro told Isekai'd that he had booked a private room to keep the noise down and suggested they move there. The hero agreed and the guys all went to the private room together. Ro apologized that they had to go to such an unsightly room, but the hero asked them not to make that face. He was, on the contrary, very grateful to them for their foresight. Fela had already been shown a snippet of the letter that said it was better not to reveal Isen's real identity, so she tried not to make any more noise. But nevertheless, she noticed that her teacher had returned to his former form. The hero confirmed this and said that he had fully recovered and was now traveling the world. He wanted to see his students and visit different interesting places. Fela was thrilled when she heard that Isen was traveling and called it a coincidence. After all, she also traveled and went to different cities. Fela asked her teacher to let her go along with them. Isen recalled that the girl worked in the north, putting together a theater group of professionals from different creative fields. After that, she left town alone, saying that she wanted to perform all over the world. At least that's what the letter said. Apparently she was now continuing to travel, and Fela was glad he remembered all her letters. The hero replied that it was hard not to memorize such a thing. And yes, she had laid it all out in her vivid style in her letters. The girl grinned and admitted that she wished her teacher could remember her. If they were keeping the way from Saikyou, it means that they were heading south. Fela was just about to go there and knew the whereabouts of several disciples. So if they took her with them, she would be glad to help them. The personal hero was fine with it and asked for Rina's opinion. The girl also didn't mind and was willing to accept any decision of the teacher. The guy assumed that the Fela had a specific purpose for traveling, and if their plans didn't interfere with hers, they would gladly take her along. Fela smiled and said that they certainly wouldn't interfere with her. She felt happy next to her teacher, and those feelings motivated her to perform better. And in art, feelings were more important than anything else. That was why Fela really wanted to go along with the teacher and Rin. Isen glanced at Rin, who nodded her head approvingly at him. The guy said that meant they would be moving out soon, and Fela thanked Rin and the teacher for their decision. She promised to do her best. Ro saw that they had already finished their conversation and suggested that they continue with their dinner. Isen suggested that they should properly celebrate their reunion with an old comrade and drink to their reunion. Fela happily hugged her sister Rin and offered to sleep together in the same bed. She was already eager to gossip with her about their teacher, and Rin didn't mind. The hero was glad they could get along. David asked the hero for a moment and said that in all the commotion he had completely forgotten to report something. The guy approached the man and asked what the matter was. David would like permission to contribute to their upcoming journey. He would like to give them information about another hero from the trading city. The hero assumed he was talking about a measure. Isen didn't know that Fela would be here, so he originally went here to meet the mayor. David understood and said that the mayor is usually very busy, so he is not often in town. So he would like to help them gather information about him and his whereabouts. And if it was possible, Isen would stop by their main office tomorrow. The guy thanked David and said he would stop by their office tomorrow. David agreed and wished them good night and farewell. Ro and David walked to their main headquarters door through the magic of words. They walked to the 4th floor where the supervisor's office was located. Ro pulled up his chair and sat in it. He exhaled heavily, and David noticed that his day was proving to be quite eventful. Ro took off his glasses and said that it had been. The wagon broke down and he was attacked by bandits, but luckily it ended well. He never would have thought that he would be able to meet the prophet Isen himself, a legend he had heard about as a child. David agreed with him and said that they still managed to become friends as well. Plus, he was able to talk to him before he even knew he was a prophet. Also, the hero did not even know that he was one of the founders of the doors to the magic of words. He was glad that they were able to get to know each other without burdening each other with unnecessary formalities. As a result, Ro was convinced that Isen was a very reliable person, and for him as a merchant, such a thing was very important. David wanted to repay him in the same way and suggested that they start gathering information. David said that the reception office of the city government should be open even at night. Of course, it's not the most urgent matter, and they don't have to listen to them after sundown, but they should go along with them as representatives of a big company. Ro opened the doors and said they would go to the management department first. David forgot something and called out to Ro. He said that the deputy mayor wanted to assign them some task. It was probably something dangerous, but they should try it. Ro interjected about the assignment and said that was where they would start their search for information. A hearty dinner had lifted the boys' spirits and they were ready to work all night. Early the next morning, the main character headed to the main headquarters called the Door to the Magic of Words. He looked up at the large building and said that he was there. Although it was quite early now, but there were already quite a few people here, so the rumors about them being successful were true. The hero recalled that he had been advised to go to the reception desk first. He wished the receptionist a good morning and asked permission to ask her a question. The girl inquired what business he had come to them for. Isen introduced himself by his name and said that he had an appointment with Ro and David. He asked to tell them about his coming, and the girl clarified that he meant the director of the company. The guy confirmed this and said that they had personally invited him. The girl apologized for her doubts. To begin with, she would like to know who he was, as suddenly a male voice called out to the hero. David already suspected that he would come to a discovery, so he came to check and turned out to be right. The girl did not understand why Mr. David was here, and the man replied that Isekai'd was his guest and he had personally come out to meet him. The girl was surprised that it was indeed his acquaintance and apologized for not being able to give a proper welcome. David asked not to worry about it, it was just that he had not notified her beforehand. This was a person to whom he owed a debt of gratitude, so he would like to greet him appropriately next time. The people in the building were immediately interested in the guy's identity. They thought it was amazing that the boss personally came out to meet the mysterious guest. Besides, they were going to the meeting room for directors. The boss said that he was his debtor and people wanted to know who he was. The receptionist thought that the reception area was the link between the company and the customers, and she thought she could memorize the faces of all the important customers. She was curious to know how influential Mr. Isekai'd was. As he climbed the stairs, David apologized, for he had kept his status a secret from the employees. But the hero thought that everything was fine, besides caution would not hurt them. David laughed and noticed that there were no female companions with Isekai'd. It turned out that the two had spent the whole night talking and were now sound asleep. They went to the third floor where the main meeting room was located. David immediately warned that there would be one other person present today besides Ro. He had information about the measure and hoped the hero didn't mind. Isekai'd replied that he didn't see it as a problem and was fine with it. In that case, the man opened the doors and asked him to go inside. Inside they were greeted by a Ru and another man. The man with the mustache greeted the distinguished Mr. Isekai'd and said that he was glad to meet him. He introduced himself as the deputy mayor of the trading city. The man's name was Woods and it was a pleasure to meet Mr. Isekai'd. The hero reciprocated Mr. Woods and thanked him for taking the time to talk to them. David replied to the hero that he was a proven man. He explained the situation to him and Woods said he wanted to meet Isekai'd in person. Woods said that their city had prospered because of the active policies of their illustrious mayor, and he had heard a lot about Isekai'd. Therefore, he was honored to meet him. Woods said that if the measures had known of his arrival, he would have quit all his work. He thanked Isekai'd for coming here secretly. Like the mayor said, he was a man who thought of others. Isekai'd became embarrassed and said he just felt it was necessary to do so. At this moment, the mayor was away. He had gone to a neighboring town on business and would return in about 1 or 2 weeks. Now they had someone who would be able to immediately report the mayor's return, and then they could schedule a meeting by that time. Hero thanked David and Ro for all they had done for him as well as Mr. Woods. Woods asked not to thank them and asked the hero if he had plans after this meeting. The guy replied that he didn't have anything special and asked what Woods wanted. The fact was that, relying on his abilities, he wanted to ask him for one request. He wanted Isekai'd, with the help of the prophet's powers, to find out information from the criminal without killing him. The hero wanted to make sure that Mr. Woods was well aware of his powers. But Woods asked not to doubt, after all, he was the deputy mayor. The hero probably already knew that trading cities built special pastures where harmless demonic beasts were raised. The boy thought about domestication. Since ancient times, there were tamers who subdued and contracted demonic beasts. Isekai'd had been actively involved in this field before, but it was still an undeveloped industry. And in truth, an urgent message came from such a pasture at the rampage of demonic beasts. The barriers and equipment did not respond to the beasts' outbursts of aggression. If the hero understood correctly, Wood's request was to stop the rampage of the animals. He turned out to be right, for the domesticated beasts were very valuable, so they had to be stopped without causing harm. David replied that they usually dealt with such requests, but this time it would be a little difficult for them. They didn't have that many specialists right now. The hero hoped that David would be okay with him taking the job, and thought that Ryan and Fela would join him. David smiled and said he would be only too happy to do so. Besides, their gift was equal to the abilities of 100 men. In that case, the hero said that he would honor their request. After all, he was still staying here for a long time. They shook hands, and the hero said that they had also done him a favor. Woods confessed that he would help them out a lot, and they would be sure to reward him generously. Now that that was settled, the hero suggested that they should get on with the task at hand. Woods replied that he would give them a map, and the details could be found out on the spot. The boy asked for permission to start by picking up his female students, and David was fine with that. The man replied that he had arranged it in advance and they were already waiting for him in the reception area. David opened the door and said that he would send an escort with them, and as soon as they returned, he would introduce them. When the protagonist, along with David, left the room, Ro expressed his opinion to Woods. He was amazed at how Ison quickly agreed to such a sudden request, and Woods was in agreement with him. Woods admitted that he too was greatly surprised by this, and was certainly glad that he was able to see the profit for himself. He could not even believe that he could have been so responsive. Among the 100 heroes, including the mayor, there were a great many sympathetic people, and Ro was sure that this was the influence of Mr. Ison. Their mayor had a strong character, and this influenced the atmosphere in the town. Perhaps he had become like that after learning from the prophet. Ro motioned for Woods to take a seat and said he would make him some tea. He probably had another assignment, and Woods said it was true. He had a job for them as a middleman. An intermediary company is a conducted organization that cooperates with the city. Such assignments had a high value. Even a small assignment paid well, so the companies, of which they were one, were contacted first. As far as Ro understood, this assignment was quite troublesome. More specifically, it was an assignment with a high level of danger. On the outskirts of the city, there was a large mansion where a man called a scientist lives. Something strange had been happening there lately. Since the beginning of this year, he had spent all his time in confinement. From time to time, people came to him to deliver provisions. Ro suggested that this scholar was immersed in research, and that was the whole problem. He asked the people who came to him if they wanted to know about the power of the Dark God. Ro agreed that this was in all likelihood not a good thing. During the war, there were many people wanting to get hold of the power of the Dark God, and it was said that even now there were active secret orders. After receiving the information, they wanted to send soldiers at once, but after taking into account the information from the frightened townspeople, they realized that if they started investigating openly, everyone who had anything to do with the order would not come even one step closer to this place. Therefore, the Woods wanted to ask Mr. Ro to conduct a secret investigation under the pretext of delivering food. They needed to infiltrate the house and gather information, and this required a mage with a strong gift who could discern objects with evil matter. There was only a Ru in their town that possessed this ability. Magical vision was one of the abilities of Ro's eyes. Because of this, he could distinguish energy by color. Therefore, he could detect the evil energy that was in objects. This was a very useful ability not only as a merchant. Even so, it required high concentration to use the gift. And if there was little evil energy in the items, it was difficult to trace it. Considering Ro had not recovered from the bandit attack, this would be problematic. Though his gift is strong, he hoped he could help them in this case, and Woods agreed with him. Woods recalled that Ro was more used to this type of work. Naturally, a danger premium would be added to the usual remuneration. Woods wanted to know if Ro could do the job, and the guy took the head. He told Woods that he was right and he was used to such assignments. He finally agreed to take the job. They had to hurry, for anything involving the Dark God required no delay. On the street, Ryan along with Fela met the main character. Ryan thought he had accepted the assignment and they were bound to go together. Fela asked him not to think of leaving her behind even though she had only joined them yesterday. The guy happily agreed with them and offered to rejoin the company. David called out to everyone in the headquarters and asked for some attention. Everyone present wanted to know from the boss who these people were, and David told them that they had helped him a lot. Some of the people recognized Fela, who was one of the hundreds of guests. They couldn't believe that a hero musician would really go with them. The man said that the magic of music improved their abilities and mood. People started discussing her playing that they had listened to before, and it was just delightful. They were very grateful to her for that. The hero noticed that the 100 heroes were really respected, and he was happy for his students. But people had doubts about whether the others could handle the task. The job was quite dangerous, and the hero's appearance looked weak, even though they were sturdily built. A friend told the man that they were brought by the boss himself, so everything would be fine. David didn't want to say it again, and he certainly wouldn't. The fact was that these people had gotten his recommendation and would be rude to doubt them. Everyone present understood the boss, and David asked them to start checking their equipment. Everyone immediately started following his order. The hero noticed that David was a pretty good boss and people liked him. The man grinned and said that he still had a long way to go to be the teacher of 100 heroes. He apologized for his subordinates who didn't think too highly of them and asked them to ignore it. After a while, the men said that they had prepared everything, and David praised them for their quick work. In that case, they should have moved out on the road. Later, their whole group of men reached a pasture on the outskirts of the town under the scorching sun. They were met by a man in farmer's clothes who had heard that their company had taken up the task. He thanked that the boys had arrived just today. The hero assumed that the man in front of them was a pasture worker and turned out to be right. The man greeted the Iceman. He had been warned in advance by the mayor that Isekai'd was coming here. They had been assigned to deal with the rampaging monsters, and apparently the hero had already realized where they were. The boys looked up to the top of the pasture. Just in their direction rushed 3 beasts. They were sheep with smooth, shiny wool and strong big horns. One of the sheep easily broke the wooden barrier in front of it and broke free. Isekai'd recognized the metal sheep, and apparently he was already familiar with them. The farmer said that when they were excited about something, their wool and horns took on the properties of metal. You could see for yourself what happened to the wooden fence. Although outwardly the metal fence around the pasture was still holding up, it was only a matter of time before it too was broken. Normally the sheep were calm, but something had stirred them up and now they could not calm down. The farmer pointed to the nearest building and said that it was surrounded by a fence fortified with strong defense magic. One could drive the sheep there and keep them there until they calmed down. The hero saw another option. With their help they could find out the cause of the rampage and eliminate it. The farmer supported such an option of Mr. Iceness. David had no doubt that with their strength they could try to subdue them, and asked how many metal sheep there were in total. According to the mayor's judgment, there were 104 of them. They were very precious sheep to them, and they became attached to them. Before anything bad happened, it was necessary to try to calm them down. David understood and promised to try to treat them easier. David asked Mr. Isekai'd to see how strong his effect would be, and the hero agreed with him. A flock of sheep was just rushing toward them. David concentrated and decided to begin. When the sheep got close to him, he used the magic of subduing. The magic dispersed a certain distance and the sheep were able to stop in front of David. The man said to Mr. Isekai'd that apparently it was not enough. Such magic would surely be enough to restrain them. David notes that this is true, but the problem is not completely solved. At least this way they won't get hurt, and David suggested chasing those sheep back behind the fence. David turned to everyone present and asked them to break into 3s and bring in a sheep from each road. Everyone immediately got to work, and the hero suggested that it was time for them to move out as well. Fela told the teacher that it was their common assignment, so she would try her best too. Rin also didn't want to let her teacher down and said they should split up. She wanted to go in a group with Fela, and the teacher would go separately. Isekai'd agreed, and the Fela laughed and asked her to rely on her as the oldest student. Besides, Rin's help would be indispensable for her. The girl thanked Fela for her trust. In that case, the hero decided to go to the right side. Fela asked the teacher to watch from the sidelines to see how she would cope. One of the metal sheep was rushing at Rina, and the girl thought that it should not be killed. As she realized, hypnosis has little effect on them in this state, and she had an idea. Rin dodged the sheep at the very last moment and pulled out her dagger. The sheep walked past the girl and stopped. After a couple moments, it fell to the ground. Rin attempted to infuse magic through a swooping kick. Although it was a somewhat crude method, but it was effective. Rin asked the sheep to fall into a sound sleep. Fela found it rather surprising that Rin was able to put this sheep into sleep with her sword. The girl took out her violin and said that now she had to show what she could do. Rin, of course, apologized for her question, but she wondered where she got her violin from. David was thrilled that the girls had already caught one sheep, but he had expected nothing less from Mrs. Rin. The girl grinned and thanked him for his praise. She wondered how the man was doing. David gave an embarrassed glance in the direction of his boys, who were desperately trying to catch and subdue at least one of the sheep. 2 men were trying to restrain a sheep that their magic of words wasn't working on. The partner asked his friend to hold on and wanted someone to help them. The men tried to catch up with the sheep that had just escaped their grasp. It had to be caught up faster before it accelerated. David couldn't believe that these animals couldn't be held down even by those trained in martial arts. The main characters could see that they were holding them by force, but they are exhausted. One way or another it would take some time. David thought that muscular word mages and ordinary mages, as well as people of close contact professions, would somehow manage. Fela smiled and said that she would help them with performance magic. Their powers would increase greatly if they listened to her playing and singing. David thanked Mrs. Durham if it was not a problem for her. Rena was still curious to know where she got the instrument from. She assumed it was stashed in her bag that collected magic. In response, the girl only chuckled enigmatically. She promised that she would tell her secret later, but for now, she should be allowed to prioritize her performance. In order not to cause trouble for the word mages, the girl decided to only play and got down to business. As soon as she started playing, her music began to spread across the field. The men that were restraining the metal sheep with all their might froze in place, and for a moment forgot about their difficulties. No one realized what that beautiful melody was that made the body stop so warm. The men began to notice that they were overflowing with strength and were sure that now they would succeed. The troop began to restrain the sheep, and one of the workers asked the others to hold on. Apparently, these sheep had become docile. This is exactly what David expected from a hero for raising 100. He told the girl that she helped by her reinforcement of the subordinates. Fela smiled and admitted that she was pleased to see everyone working with smiles on their faces. Their attention was caught by a certain rumbling noise that was heard from behind, and the heroes turned back in surprise. One of the huge metal sheep was still not tame and was about to attack one of the workers. Fela said they were out of range and the amplification had no effect on them. Rin ran forward and exclaimed that they had to help them, but Fela asked her to wait. She told a frightened Rin that everything was fine, but the girl didn't understand what she meant. Since their situation was an emergency, Fela decided to do something different. She stretched out her arm and used start magic. Fela's right hand shot straight at the sheep, which immediately fell to the ground. It seemed to the girl that this had cooled their heads and everything would be fine now. Rina wondered what was wrong with Fela's right arm. Fela recalled that really no one knew of her race except the master. She was an automaton and possessed magic to disassemble and reassemble her body. Rina felt embarrassed and said that it was the first time she had seen such a thing. She was told that such a race could not be found very often. The origin of her race was a mystery. In appearance, it was hard to distinguish them from humans. The numbers were extremely low, and details about them were virtually unknown. The social studies textbooks and books that Rina was recommended by her teacher said only this. David was also impressed. Rina had heard that the teacher's textbooks included different races, but it was surprising to say the least. After all, not only could she play an instrument and sing, but she could also share her body. The girl was embarrassed and admitted that she was glad for the praise. She was increasingly filled with a desire to get down to business. After saying that, the girl used her left hand and shot forward. The arm flew towards the guys who were trying to catch up with another metal sheep. They assumed the wooden fence would not stop it and rushed after it. At the same time, one of the men noticed a mysterious hand grabbing the sheep by the head and pinning it to the ground. Fela said that she could launch not only her hands, but also various other parts of her body. The men looked in surprise at the sheep, which appeared immobilized. They were shocked that the girl was able to hold a sheep they couldn't hold with one left. In addition, she was a race of automatons. They were able to see in all her glory the hero who raised 100. Fela was happy that they were praising her and waved her hand. She said that their master was capable of many things without relying on race specifics, and he was even more amazing. Fela only offered a glance in his direction. In the middle of the field stood an Isen who had managed to subdue an entire herd. He looked like a shepherd who was calling all the other sheep to him. A surprised David along with the girls ran up to Mr. Isen. The boy said that by now he had brought most of the rams. David did not understand how he had done it, for all the sheep's wool had turned white and they were excited. The hero smiled and said he was just talking to them. David didn't understand how he could just talk to the sheep, for there was no way they could contain their excitement. Their conversation was interrupted by the shouts of the boys asking the boss to apologize. One of the rambunctious sheep broke out of their hands and ran straight at Isley. David was startled to see that it was their leader, and he was the healthiest he had ever seen. David immediately warned Mr. Iceman that if they didn't get out of the way, they would be in trouble. But the boy smiled and said he would deal with it. He didn't need to run, but David wanted to stop him. Ison calmly asked David to herd the rest of the rams so they wouldn't get in the way. A loud clatter of hooves was heard nearby, and the hero noticed a ram kindly running towards him. The lad decided to take his chance, and thought it would be quite easy to calm him down. David was confused and didn't understand the reason why the hero put his staff on the ground and asked Mr. Isians what he was up to. The hero stood up and said that the first thing he would do was to drop his speed, otherwise it would be dangerous. As the huge ram leader approached the lad, Ison stretched his arms forward. He grabbed the huge metal ram by its huge horns and threw it over himself. Ison smiled and offered it a glimpse of the blue sky before tipping it over on its back. Everyone present froze in place with astonishment. David and the others found it hard to believe that the hero was able to throw the metal ram over his shoulder. No doubt he had toppled this heavy beast weighing as much as an ingot of metal. Apparently the leader of the rams was not injured at all, but only fell to the ground. David said that the ram was turned upside down and apparently no damage was done. It was able to avoid damage from hitting the ground. Fela came up to the shocked man and said that it was surprising, but such was the fighting style of the master. David laughed and said that when he saw it with his own eyes, he realized the creepiness of it even though he had heard about it from Ro. He had never seen such movements even in warriors specially trained in close combat. The girl grinned and said it was natural, since the master had trained them in the introduction of combat. Fela had no doubt that Rina had also learned something from him. Rin confirmed her words. She wanted to learn many things, but Master Ison had only taught her the art of self-defense so far. David laughed nervously at the thought that her attacks were only self-defense. David still looked at Aizen in amazement as well and thought that he was the hero master. Meanwhile, the hero asked the entire herd to calm down. They were clearly surprised that he had their leader over his shoulder. The guy smiled and asked them to relax and to stop their movement and listen to what he was telling them. With those words, the hero released his magic, which affected all the sheep in the area. They froze in place as if listening and understanding his words. Everyone was shocked that Aizen had calmed so many sheep at one time, and they immediately calmed down. A shocked David approached the hero and asked Mr. Aizen what he had just done. The guy didn't understand what he was talking about, for it was the same magic of words as he had. He simply spoke to them, infusing his magic into the words. David thought he was probably joking. Besides, the hero had talked to the sheep long enough. Word magic was mostly used for short words. Long words, of course, increased the consumption of magical energy and it became harder to control. It was also important to put the right amount of magic into simple and complex words and phrases. A mage of words was more than enough to control 2 phrases. But to speak for so long, putting magic into everything and controlling it, apparently only a skillful prophet could do so. The hero decided to tell David that he had gathered all the rams in the neighborhood. Apparently he had, and David decided to go and get the corillers, for which Aizen was grateful to him. Meanwhile, the hero was about to ask the sheep why they were so dramatically excited. Based on the fact that Aizen could talk to magical beasts, David hoped for his help. At the same time, Ro arrived at the station in the outskirts of the trading city. Together with his group, Ro arrived at the mansion they needed. He wanted to be seen in readiness by his boys, and the man bid Ro sent to begin. Everyone here pretended to be a loader, but they were actually soldiers under the auspices of Zamuraza. They were ordered to secretly enter the building and inspect it. If they found anything, the researchers were to be captured. And if it came to violence, the soldiers would cover for Mr. Ro. A group of people approached the mansion and knocked on the doors. It took 4 knocks and then 3 more. If the previous merchant was to be believed, this was a signal for the person in the mansion. Ro wished the owner a good day with a smile. He said that they were concerned about the company, a food wholesaler, and he had come here to deliver food to him. The doors opened slightly and a seemingly mad scientist cautiously peeked out of them. All as Ro had been told. He was undoubtedly a researcher, but Ro pretended not to know anything about it. He apologized and asked if he was the owner of the mansion. The man agreed with his assumption, but the Ru was not the same person who had visited him earlier. The scholar asked Ro what had happened to that salesman. The fellow replied that now the salesman was feeling unwell and could not go to work because of illness. However, this delivery had to be made today at all costs, so he asked him, as a friend working for the same company, to fill in for him. Ro had his letter of apology with him, as well as a document of the substitute courier if he wanted to look at it. The owner of the mansion quickly snatched the paper from his hand and looked at the letter. He said that it was indeed his handwriting, and the document was genuine. The owner of the mansion admitted that they really needed food, for the supplies were running low. He allowed them to enter, for which Ro was grateful to him. He gave orders to his boys to bring the food into the mansion. The owner led the guys to a room where there was a big mess and asked them to leave the load here. He also asked them to leave as soon as they were done. Ro thought that wasn't exactly what he had heard. This old man was supposed to take the load in the hallway, but for whatever reason he let them inside and was absolutely secured. Ro corrected his glasses and sank into thought. The windows he had seen along the way were boarded up and he was clearly wary of something. For now, Ro couldn't decide if he was good or bad. Mr. Ro was approached by one of the boys and Ro told him that they were just getting rid of the extra eyes, taking advantage of the situation. Mr. Ro applied the demon eye of selection and looked around the room carefully. It looked like there was a secret door and Ro seemed to be the kind of door that would open after infusing a certain amount of magic. One of the men asked the Lord if he could open it. They didn't mind if the responsibility fell to the city government and Ro said he would open it himself. He thought it would be sad if they found nothing there. Ro leaned against the wall and poured some of his magical power into it. The doors opened and the men smiled, expecting something like that from Mr. Ro. The guy told the guys that he had encountered this kind of device before and opened the doors, but their faces immediately changed when they saw the horrifying sight before them. The boys turned pale and stared into the room from which came whining and crunching. Inside was a human skeleton and the disheveled and disfigured body of a metal sheep. Next to the corpse of the sheep sat a huge wolf that was devouring its flesh. Ro and the others realized that they had seen exactly what they should not have seen. The group of people were shocked as they stepped inside the terrifying corridor. Right in front of them sat a wolf that was devouring an already dead sheep. Nearby, human bones along with their remains were already lying in the corner. The partner asked Mr. Rowe to be vigilant with this magical beast. Rowe suggested that it became like this because it ate a metal sheep that had been metamorphosed. The merchant noticed a torn collar with an address on the dead animal's body. A man in the group suggested that there were human bones lying in the left corner. Rowe realized that this collar belonged specifically to a dabbit. More precisely, this sheep was from his pasture. From a dark corridor with a lantern in his hands, a mad scientist came towards them, who said that the healed food saw extra. Rowe suggested that this room was connected to the rest of the rooms as well. They had already confirmed that he was keeping magical beasts without authorization, and it was necessary to capture him. Rowe decided to clarify from the researcher if these were indeed metal sheep and human bones. He pointed his finger at them, and the researcher thought he was talking about fodder. The researcher saw nothing wrong with it. Rowe was puzzled when the researcher referred to these remains as their food. The researcher grabbed his head and said it was a real chore to take and carry one sheep at a time from the pasture. He spent a lot of time feeding them until he realized it was easier to drag people in and feed them. In all honesty, thinking problems were his worst enemy. The group of people looked at the pondering scientist like he was crazy. The researcher bent down to his shadow wolf that was devouring a sheep. The old man said with a crazy look that if he didn't eat more, there wouldn't be enough mana for that cute girl, and he suggested the wolf devour those people now. The wolf perked up his ears and stared at the humans. The scientist informed him that his food had finally arrived. Finally, the old man offered to have fun and the wolf immediately jumped on the roo. The merchant threw a piece of paper with writing at the attacking wolf and used a magic shield. The paper glowed and then transformed into a huge plank of wood that stopped the wolf. Rowe found it useful that he had stashed magic items for self-defense and asked his men to act now. The boys grabbed their weapons, which they had hidden in household items, and prepared for battle. As the wolf clawed its huge claws into the wood shield, the other two guys tried to strike it. One of the guys was shocked when he felt that the wolf's fur was as hard as a rock. The partner with a huge sledgehammer in his hands asked everyone to get out of the way and swung at the beast. He hit it squarely in the head and the wolf fell to the ground. But the magical beast was still alive. Apparently, it was strong due to the fact that it was completely made of magic. One of the young boys noticed that the wolf had scratched the strong magical shield of the roo, and its strength was clearly not lacking. The boys were horrified to notice that the explorer had vanished. Rowe pointed toward a dark corridor and told the gentleman to go that way. Rowe saw the researcher run into the depths. He thought in his mind that he would be of little use in battle, and so he looked around. Walking down the dark corridor, they reached a massive door and assumed the explorer was behind it. The boys asked the merchant what they would do. Since they had confirmed the crime, they should go back and report everything. The man thought it would be safer that way. It wasn't a fact that there weren't any wolves left here. Rowe was of the same opinion, as long as they were released from here. The group of men along with the merchant came out of the dark basement and tried to open the door through which they entered here. But the door wouldn't open and apparently it was sealed with magic. Rowe said that the walls were covered with resistance to destruction magic and apparently they were locked in here. Thus, the only thing left for them to do is to capture the culprit. At the same time, Eiyuu and the others were in the country pasture. The farmer admitted to the boys that he was amazed to hear that they had already rounded everyone up. It was exactly what he had expected from the door to the magic of words. David grinned and said that it was not their merit, but Mr. Eiyuu and his companions. He must have already talked to the metal sheep, and it seemed rather surprising to the farmer. He hadn't realized that the hero could talk to magical beasts. He had heard from the Zammer how the man had only ever made amazing speeches about the Iceman. Farmer was curious about Iceman's identity, but all David could tell him was the same as Zammer. The farmer clarified that they were definitely done with the job. One way or another, he was willing to pay them a large reward for quick completion. David thanked the farmer for the premium and asked him to give it to Mr. Eiyuu. They walked to the field where the hero was talking to the sheep. David called out to the lad and said that he had brought the servant. The man noticed that the hero was puzzled about something and wanted to know the reason. Eiyuu looked at the farmer and wanted to ask him some questions. The surprised worker wanted to know what the reason was. The hero clarified that there were 100 metal sheep in this pasture in total. The man confirmed that this was the case. One of the duties of the pasture management was to maintain a population of 100 sheep, no more and no less. Eiyuu understood and said that there were about 80 of them here. The farmer recalled that there were 15 more left in the pasture, so there were 5 missing. David looked around and said he didn't see any more sheep. The hero said that Fela, Rin, and the Lords of the Word magicians had scoured the area, but had not found a single sheep. But the iron partition was intact all around. The sheep weren't that good at jumping, so it's hard to imagine them escaping beyond it. The hero wanted to ask without malice if any of the servants could have gotten rid of the sheep. But the farmer, without hesitation, replied that it was impossible, because they all took care of the animals faithfully. He was firmly convinced that the servants could not have done such a thing. Thus, Isekai'd decided that it was someone from outside. All the sheep had told him something. The animals told him that they would be stolen, eaten, and so on. David did not understand what Mr. Isekai'd meant by that. If you organize the words of the sheep, they were saying that they were being kidnapped from within. They were sorry for the destruction of what the people who gave them food had done. But they were afraid and had no other choice. The farmer clarified that the sheep themselves did not want to hurt them, and the hero said that this was absolutely true. On the contrary, they were grateful for their work, which touched the farmer. He smiled and admitted that it was a bit of a joy that they had built such a relationship. That was why the man could not let someone steal them and wanted to know who did it. The hero replied that they had said something else. It was done by a man who looked like a monster. From where he came from, one could feel a strong desire to kill and wanted to escape from there as quickly as possible. And it came from the direction of the city. Someone with a strong desire to kill came from there. David thought it might have been a magical beast, but the farmer couldn't remember any such news of a beast from the town. Isekai'd asked the sheep to be patient for a while until they could get rid of their pursuer. The animals replied that they could not wait long, but would do their best, so they calmed down. In any case, David suggested focusing on the man stealing the sheep. Even one animal is pretty heavy and needed at least a couple strong men to drag her. It would have been helpful if the sheep had called them some omen, but that's just what the hero was asking. Isekai'd mentally asked the sheep if they had seen a man stealing the beasts, and one of the animals saw the moment of the theft. This crazy man asked them to be grateful that they could become food for a creature that feeds on demon meat. He thought his methods of raising them were infallible and grabbed one of the sheep. Everyone was in astonishment, but that was exactly what the sheep said. The hero relayed their words to everyone. David thought they were joking. Based on their words, it appeared that there was a sheep in town who was raising a magical beast by feeding it demon meat. As they were talking, a noise was heard and David thought it was an explosion. Isekai'd looked back toward the city and said that the sound was coming from there. Earlier, a group of people along with a merchant were in the scientist's mansion. One of the men went to the door and warned everyone that he would open it. Ro asked him to be more careful. Ro didn't see any traces of magic, but he couldn't see the material traps recognizing magic with his eyes. With his words, the man carefully opened the doors. A scholar stood in front of them and said that they shouldn't have been afraid and asked the merchants to go inside. It was a small room with only one table and the scholar himself was standing on some kind of makeshift circle with a pentagram. He assumed that the boys had defeated that wolf. It actually had high attacking abilities but low intelligence, so the group was enough to massacre it. The scientist said that this phantom wolf was made of mana and he could make many more of them, so he didn't care about him. In any case, the old man didn't understand why Ro and the others were here. He had forgotten to ask about it earlier. The merchant replied that they were here to ask him about research, and if his actions could bring harm to the city, they would be forced to stop him as representatives of the Major's army. Besides, they had already witnessed such actions. The scientist assumed that it was all from the feeding or the wolf's cultivation. He thought that the guys had come here to force him to follow absurd rules by using cruelty. In that case, it was a good thing, because his work here had already been done. The scientist smiled and said that he was done with cultivation and he didn't need anything else. One of the group offered to arrest him immediately, but Ro asked him to stop. Using his magic eye, he saw that there was something on the wall directly behind the scientist. The old man, without leaving the circle, turned to the wall and offered to go that way. He dispelled the wall that was made of illusion magic and hid his escape route. But the scholar called it absurd, for he had no intention of escaping. Ro asked the group to stop, for there was something on the other side of the wall. Right behind the scientist in the dark corridor was a huge three-headed wolf-like creature. The man saw several magical beasts and exclaimed that they were just huge. Another guy said that this black mist couldn't be a miasma. Ro stared at the creature in horror, not realizing what kind of wolf it was. The scientist said that this was the reason why they were absolute fools, for it was not an easy wolf. He had made great efforts to raise it, and its evolution after eating the flesh of the evil god had turned it into a Fenrir of the abyss. Ro exclaimed that it was dangerous to breed such a thing, and his actions could lead to huge risks to the city. But the scholar saw no problem with it and said that he had truly grown it. The group of people couldn't understand what was going on. The scientist turned to the abyss Fenrir and asked to merge with its beautiful body. The huge monster immediately devoured the scientist without thinking. It seemed to everyone else that he had killed himself, but with the help of Ro's magic eye he saw that this was not the case. He wasn't just eaten, but had gotten inside the Fenrir. The scholar laughed and called it a real success, for his fusion was complete. The crazy old man finally felt the body of the beast, which was absorbing divine powers. The guys had no doubt that it was the researcher's voice coming from the Fenrir, and didn't realize what was happening. But the young ones like this guy probably didn't know about merging with a magical beast. However, this technique was considered forgotten after the battle with the evil god. The scholar grinned his monster teeth and admitted that it was really enjoyable to look down on others from above. He called people stupid. This technique was to a fine degree a forgotten technique, and there was no chance of that. Ro didn't know or understand how he used this technique, and it seemed that he had unmistakably transferred himself into the body of a wolf. Fenrir laughed and said that it was nothing like that. He called it evolution, but he thought that foolish people like them were prone to foolish thoughts. The center wolf head looked up towards the light and said that he finally understood his master. No doubt it was all real. The young boy looked at the wolf in horror and asked what he was doing. Fenrir assumed that the guy couldn't have heard his voice. In that case, he realized that he was the only one who could hear it. The man didn't understand what the Fenrir was saying. The monster was going to destroy the city they had made, as well as destroy humanity. His master's voice kept telling him to kill and destroy, so he wanted to do it. Fenrir used his magic power and summoned the shadow wolves. Next to him, a whole pack formed from his dark matter. Ro exclaimed that they would not be able to overpower so many wolves and ordered them to retreat. Fenrir said he would destroy them and used his flaming breath, then opened his wide maw. Ro noticed the sheer amount of mana the wolf was accumulating and suggested that if he hit them, it would be bad. Fenrir shot his huge ball of mana at Ro. Meanwhile, the two remaining guys were waiting outside the huge mansion for the others. They figured it had already been a long time since the guys had gone inside. They suggested that they should have stopped guarding it and gone inside. The partner agreed with the man and suggested they go inside the mansion. Barely had they had time to think about it when a huge explosion went off and startled the guys. The explosion was so powerful that the entire building behind was destroyed. From the huge powerful explosion, all the people nearby started coming out of their houses to see what was wrong. People quickly began to accumulate outside the mansion. The guys who were waiting for their comrades didn't understand what was going on there. The guy suggested that they stop playing merchants and take up their weapons from the convoy. They needed to prepare for battle. A group of Roos emerged from a large, flaming mansion. A shabby-looking merchant came out to the boys and coughed. The people waiting for them outside were glad they were back and asked what happened there. The agitated man warned the people that a pack of magical wolves was approaching, and they needed to evacuate the residents immediately. A battle was about to break out here soon. But the people present didn't understand what he was talking about. The man raised his hands and asked each resident to evacuate. One of the men turned to Ro and said that he had saved them, and if it wasn't for the merchant, they probably would have died there. Ro laughed nervously and recalled using his magic shield at the time of the attack. The angle of the shield was sharp. It didn't block the attack, but it reflected it. The man asked Mr. Ro to leave, and wanted to take this battle to them, but Ro refused. Ro recalled that it was the monster's breath. It completely ignored the protective magic that surrounded the walls, otherwise they would have been able to escape. They needed a magical defense field. Ro fixed his glasses and told the boys that he would fight on their side. The man looked at Mr. Ro respectfully and smiled. While they were deciding what to do next, a pack of wolves appeared on the horizon and headed in their direction. The man with the bandage warned everyone that they were already here and asked them to use the heavy weapons from the convoy. He also ordered them to split into pairs and cover each other. Following the pack of wolves, the Fenrir himself appeared out of the cloud of black smoke. The huge beast clumsily climbed onto the roof of the huge flaming mansion and laughed. The scholar wasn't quite used to this body yet, and still couldn't feel some parts, but he still liked this magnificent and pleasant body. He threatened to destroy everything here, particularly this fake city made by humans. The first thing the Fenrir did was turn his attention to the people closest to him, who were perfectly suited to raising panic. The smaller wolves pounced on the guys, who fought back with swords. The leader of the group told the guys that they had to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The guys agreed and believed that they could defeat them. The huge Fenrir reused the shadow wolf summoning technique. Ro and the rest of the guys were terrified as the wolves started appearing all over the city in every alleyway. Fenrir smirked and told the people that he could summon countless wolves. He wondered how long the men would last and asked them to show him how long they could last. One of the guys noticed that the wolves were starting to multiply and warned Ro about it. Ro cheered the boys up and said they could still hold them out, and the group backed him up. A huge pack of wolves pounced on Ro and his partners, and the guys started fighting off the monsters. It wasn't long before the merchant and the others began to run out of steam. They didn't realize how quickly it happened. After all, it seemed to them that they had only been fighting for an hour. This suburb was far away from the army, and the people didn't know how long they had to hold out. The three-headed Fenrir used thunderous breath. The group noticed that he was attacking again, and the Ro again covered them with his shield. But the breath was so strong that it easily broke through his defense and struck the entire group with lightning. The man next to the merchant wanted to make sure Ro was alright. Ro corrected his glasses and said that he had just been electrocuted a little. It was only one shock, but they were pierced by such strong magic. Using his special vision, he saw clots of mana gathering in his mouth. The problem was that the merchant only had 2 spells left, and it was getting worse and worse. Ro began to lurch to the ground, and the man asked Mr. Ro not to force himself, for he was not a warrior. Ro didn't realize what he would be in the future if he couldn't force himself now. After all, someone was trying to destroy the city right in front of their eyes, including their company. Ro told the man that he loved this town, so he didn't want to spare any effort for what he loved and was willing to fight it to the end. The huge Fenrir felt everything going well, and he was almost used to this body. He suggested to his pack of wolves to end this game soon. He looked at his shadow wolves and said it was time to get serious. They had to attack together and finish them off. The pack of wolves pounced with renewed vigor on the humans who tried to fight them off. Meanwhile, the huge wolf jumped onto the roof of the building and looked around. Ro looked up and noticed that the scientist in the wolf's body was up to something. He assumed that the wolf wanted to use the breath on the entire city, and from 2 different heads at that. The merchant threw 2 writings with a magical shield embedded in them into the air, and they flew apart. Fenrir smirked, then used blizzard breath and thunder breath on both sides. His attack collapsed the Ro shields, but the Fenrir looked down at the guy and said it was useless. Ro was satisfied that he had defended the city, but at that moment the carcass of a wounded wolf crashed into him. Ro did not expect such an unexpected blow and fell to the ground. No sooner had he gotten up from the ground than another wolf jumped on him. At that moment, the merchant realized that his defenses had run out, but he was still going to fight and clenched his hand into a fist. He swung his fist and exclaimed that he was determined to fight to the end. Someone's male voice told him that these were magnificent revolutionary words. At the same moment, an Ison appeared behind the Ru and struck the attacking wolf with his staff. Ro didn't expect to see Mr. Ison here and raised his head in surprise. The merchant also noticed that his female partners had arrived with him. Apparently, they had all arrived just in time. Fenrir also noticed that reinforcements had arrived. Ison helped Mr. Ro to his feet, and the merchant thanked him for his help. Ison smiled and said that someone had asked to save him first. Ro glanced back questioningly and saw David rushing towards them with all his legs. David was glad they had arrived just in time. Ro was glad to see his partner, but didn't understand why they had come here. David said he came back as soon as he sensed something wrong. Mr. Ison heard his voice during the battle. David looked around and noticed that everything here looked terrible. The hero asked the Ru to tell him the situation if he could speak. The merchant was so puzzled that he didn't know where to start. The fact was that there was a man studying divine evil who raised a huge evil wolf. This wolf ate the scientist and merged with him. Ison and David looked at each other puzzledly. The hero replied that it looked like it was an insanely dangerous, lurking criminal. Fenrir didn't understand the reason why he felt bad when he looked at the Iceman. When everything became clear to the hero, he suggested that they move on to their plan. Ro and the soldiers were to retreat, and he wanted to deal with the 3-headed Fenrir. Fela asked the master to leave it to her. Rin agreed with her and said they would protect them while they retreated. In that case, the hero suggested that they start. He didn't know how this would end, with arrest or murder, but he would fight for this city to the end. Rin approached the man in the group and asked them all to back off and leave the rest to them. The man was confused and clearly did not want to run away from the battlefield. Meanwhile, the Fenrir said he would capture them before they escaped and ordered his pack of wolves to attack. The girl turned her head and immediately prepared her blade for battle. Fela, who was standing next to her, asked Rina to leave. She would want the girl to protect them and take these people to safety. Fela took out her violin and said she would take care of it. She also said that if they interfered with the master's plan, she would be very displeased. Based on that, she should have torn those wolves apart. Rin didn't understand how the Fela was going to use this tool in battle. The wolves were getting closer and closer, and the Fela turned to Rin. Lastly, she smiled and admitted to the girl that unfortunately it was no tool at all. With those words, she swung it upwards and disemboweled the attacking wolf. Fela didn't want to get it too dirty because she usually used it as a bow. In her hands was a rapier that looked like a violin stick earlier. Rina was surprised that she had made a bow from an enemy weapon, and it was its original form. Fela extended her hand with the violin and ordered the orchestra to unfold into a magical form. The violin shone with a bright light and began to transform into something else. Her violin turned into a cannon that covered the entire arm of the Fela. Rin was surprised that she had recreated the weapon. The girl looked at the surprised Rin and said that it was simple. She was an automaton and her body was filled with guns. When the other wolves got closer, Fela used her magical fire form and fired the cannon. Several fire charges killed several wolves at once. Rin stared at the pack and said that it was just incredible. Fela could agree with her, but admitted that this ability was unpleasant to humans, so she transformed it into the form of a tool. She wanted to know how it felt to the Rinna who had learned one of her secrets. Fela looked at the Rin seriously and asked if it was scary. The girl lowered her head and hesitated to answer, but then she looked at Fela with shining eyes and admitted that it was super cool. Fela was surprised by her answer and said that she was happy about it because she was saying the same thing as the other students. She was also pleased with the master's praise because it was even more stimulating to protect people. Rin thought that it was exactly as Sensei had told her. Fela was glad that the teacher was looking at her and even stroked her head. Those were certainly not the best words she had ever heard. But still, if they helped protect people's smiles, then they were good in their own way. Fela wondered if they should continue in that case. She extended her hand again and said that it was one of her orchestra's skills and asked the wolves to listen to it. With those words, she fired a shot in their direction. Meanwhile, the three-headed Fenrir was on the roof with the Iceman. The monster understood everything and called the hero a fool. The voice told the Fenrir that Ison was one of those who had shredded their master and banished their deity. He realized that the prophet Ison himself was standing before him. The hero said that he had never met him before. Fenrir replied that he could feel all the master's hatred for him through his blood and flesh. For this reason he was going to devour the prophet Ison. Their conversation came to an end and the Fenrir used his thunderous breath towards the hero. The boy frowned and said that he did not wish to see this ruined city again. He extended his hand with his staff and asked to absorb and block this attack. He then asked his staff to emit it like a roar. The hero's staff glowed and the wolf called him a fool. In his opinion, Isna's staff should have shattered and he would lose. But to his surprise it didn't. The hero did not even move, and his staff absorbed all the force that fell on him. Fenrir did not understand how the hero was able to block his attack, and Ison replied that it was a special weapon that was the best of its kind. The guy looked at his staff, which was still glowing with a bright light, and called it a great weapon. This staff allowed him to see many things. It was in accordance with his desire to protect this city from destruction. Fenrir didn't see this as a big deal, and in that case decided to attack with a more powerful attack. He pounced on the Iceman and extended his clawed paw. But it was a slow attack for the Iceman, and he simply dodged it. Fenrir looked behind him as the Iceman dodged. In his other hand he saw a gleaming thin sword. The wolf kept saying it was useless, for he was endowed with divine power, and yet the Ison was weaker. Fenrir smirked and asked him not to think that he could kill him with an ordinary blade. But the hero knew it was useless to chop him down, so he wasn't going to do it. During the war, he fought creatures like him until he lost his pulse. In that case, the Fenrir offered him to eat his attack, and one of the wolf's mouths opened. But no sooner had he attacked it than the Ison disappeared somewhere, and the wolf became confused. He did not even notice how the hero jumped out of nowhere and attacked the attacking wolf's mouth. The Fenrir's body began to spark with lightning and one of the attacking heads exploded. Ison coldly suggested him to close his mouth if he didn't know what to say. Fenrir was furious that he had lost one of his heads to an ordinary man. His body tilted to the side, causing him to fall off the roof, but he landed on his feet. Ison looked at him while still on the roof. Just as the hero thought, one head wasn't enough to destroy a single core. An ordinary Fenrir, on the other hand, would have already been defeated. Deep in the Fenrir's mouth as it attacked with its breath, a dark sphere that was the core was visible. With 3 heads, there should have been 1 core in each head. The guy jumped to the ground in front of the monster. He knew that as long as he didn't destroy each of its cores, the body would continue to regenerate. Fenrir immediately attacked the guy with Blizzard's breath, and the hero jumped aside. Immediately, from another head, a flaming breath descended on him. The hero noticed that the longer he fought it, the more damage it did to the city. Ison wanted to deal with him as quickly as possible. Fenrir exclaimed that he would kill him even if he had to sacrifice his body. The hero thought it would be the quickest way to attack both cores, and because of that, he decided what to do. Ison pointed his blade at the infernal Fenrir and said that those would be his last words to it. Ison turned to his body and asked it to become more intense and faster. He was gathering power for the next strike. The hero's body was enveloped in flames, which he unleashed upon the Fenrir. In response, the monster answered him with 2 different attacks from 2 heads at once. The Fenrir opened his eyes wide in surprise. For some reason, his 2 attacks didn't reach their target. His flames and cold breath passed by iceness. Fenrir realized that the blue flames surrounding his body were dispersing his breath. The hero replied that this flame of mana was made real by his mana and magic spells. Furthermore, this fire was not only used for defense. The hero turned to his blazing flame and asked it to sparkle and pierce all his enemies. Ison shifted and swiftly through the enemy's flames and approached the Fenrir. Along the way, he easily burned through the fire and icy breath of the wolf with his blue flame. As the hero approached his foe, he used Ardor's justice. In his left hand Ison held his staff, and in his right hand he held his blade. Fenrir received a frontal rush attack and his body fell to the ground. At the same moment, all the wolves that were fighting the humans in the city began to disappear. The guys were ecstatic when they saw the Iceman and the burning huge carcass of the Fenrir. The Ragged Roo excitedly admitted that it was just incredible power. David didn't even realize that hundreds of Lady Drom heroes were so strong. But Master Ison was on a completely different level. But despite such strength, the hero was usually very quiet and a very good listener. All the people who were fighting with the merchants had already realized that the prophet himself, or rather the teacher of the 100 heroes, was standing in front of them. As everyone began to rejoice in their victory, Deputy Mayor Woods, soldiers and firefighters appeared. The observation tower of the city center noticed the incident, and the troops rushed to the scene. Woods was shocked to learn that the magical beast had already been defeated. In addition, it was an infernal Fenrir. When the guys explained the situation and circumstances, they ended up getting money and public appreciation. Woods replied to the hero that he couldn't thank him enough for saving this town. The award ceremony was held that same day and Ison and the others took the reward they had earned. To celebrate their victory and the completion of their errand, the door of the Kadadama organized an evening feast. Ison based this on what he had heard. It was the report of the search of the explorer's house. Almost all of his papers had been burned. They also found only 5 metal sheep collars. That was the end of the metal sheep incident, and they gave themselves completely to the feast. After that, while the heroes shopped and helped with the rebuilding of the city, the days they spent in the trading city flew by. Then the day before his training, the head of the city was scheduled to return. There was a knock at the door of the Ison, and the hero approached to open it. Woods sincerely apologized to Master Ison, for he had come here to inform him that the mayor's schedule had changed. As the hero realized, his return date had been postponed. That was indeed the case, but the fact was that one of the chapter's messengers had returned today and delivered a message. A conference in a nearby magical city had been postponed, so in all likelihood he would still linger there for a few days. Woods bowed and deeply regretted it, but Ison smiled and said that he had nothing to apologize for. But the hero thought they might have gotten into trouble because their schedule had changed. Woods wanted to at least pass on the information about the incident with the Hell Fenrir. The hero thought about the fact that the magical beast appeared in the city while the mayor was on a business trip, and if such information leaked out, no one would be able to keep calm. Ison said that in that case, he could go to the magical city and give him the information himself. Woods was shocked that Master Ison was going to go to the magic city by himself. The hero replied that he had already spent enough time in that city. Woods would have been happy to entrust a trusted person like him with the task, but he wasn't sure if that was okay. Besides, it was not good for a prophet to do such things. But the hero replied that it was fine. After all, he was planning to visit the magical city anyway, so delivering the message wouldn't be a problem for him. It would be more of a problem if they didn't meet. Woods shook hands with the hero and said that in that case, he would rely on Master Iceness. And just like that, the hero decided to go to the Magic City. The next day, Ison, Fela, and Rina stood in front of the South Gate. Fela was excited that their journey with the Master and Rin would finally begin and was looking forward to it. Rin was also enthusiastic and supported Fela. Ison told the girls that he too enjoyed traveling in a big company. Mr. Woods told the hero that he would leave the letter and everything he needed here. At that moment, a familiar carriage pulled up to them, drawn by a unicorn. Ro wished the boys a good morning and said that it had been a long time since their celebration. In general, he had accepted the mission of transporting Mr. Ison to the neighboring town from the deputy mayor, but Ison didn't even know that. They summoned someone who was familiar with Mr. Ison's circumstances and was willing to follow him. In other words, it was a merchant who volunteered. Mr. Adson did not realize that the Roo was doing such work as well. Ro smiled and said that he didn't want to be a traitor, that he didn't pay taxes. Besides, Ison had saved him many times. As a member of the Kadadama Doors and a respected man, He thought he would be useful to them. The hero saw that he was really worried about this and thanked him for his help. Ro replied that Mr. Ison was the most considerate of people. Besides, he proved it before they even arrived in the trading city. Ro motioned for them to go inside. Unlike the previous one, this carriage was adapted for comfort. The heroes went inside and appreciated this luxurious interior. Fela smiled and admitted that it had been a long time since she had spent time on a trip talking, and she was looking forward to it. Even if they always chatted while they traveled, Ison was still looking forward to it. Rin supported them and said that this would be her first time traveling together. When everyone was comfortably settled, the carriage moved off. Ro said that in that case they were setting off on their journey. A few days had passed since the day of departure. Fela looked out of the carriage window and pointed her finger somewhere. She called out to the teacher to look at it. It looked like the fortress near them was a landmark. They said there was a beautiful view of the plain from there. Ison had never heard of it and assumed that this fortress had served gloriously during the war. Ro confirmed his guess. The buildings of that era were strong and durable, so they could be used for different purposes. Thus the hero was able to learn about everything just by passing by, which was already better than a normal walk. Rina replied that this way they could admire the scenery. Fela supported them and said that any ride with the Lord was good. Ison thanked Ro for driving the carriage so neatly, but that was his job, and neatness was only one of the delights of a carriage ride. Thanks to one of the 100 heroes suggesting road improvements, they are able to travel between cities in peace. Still, there was nothing to praise here, but the hero thought otherwise, because they could still use it, so there was something to be thankful for. The merchant laughed and noticed that the hero was quite fond of compliments, and in that case, he was glad. Fela had already realized that the gentleman praised even for trifles because it gives them strength to work even better. Rin replied that it was like that in the other world. The master praised her for simply answering the letter. The merchant smiled and said that they were grateful to him for that. The guy didn't understand what they were talking about. After all, if someone was doing their job well, it was only natural to be praised for it. Ison offered to return to their conversation. Thanks to the Rue carriage, they had seen quite a few places, and he realized how much fun it could be. The merchant was glad they had enjoyed everything. The ship business was now growing too, and many steamboats had appeared in the last 10 years. They even had huge ships that looked like cities and were suitable for traveling. The hero thought that indeed, one of his students was planning a ship of a similar shape. Fela exclaimed that with the master, they could go to the ends of the world at least. She had gotten so much inspiration during this time that she was ready to write a song. After a while, another marvelous view opened before them with the lake glistening in the sun. Mr. Ison said that the view of the mountains was just beautiful, and Ro supported him. The mountains were one of the landmarks near the City of Magic. They are called the Mountains of Mater. They had different flora and fauna than other mountains. Many rare species were found here. The mountain trails were monitored, and it was a great place for mountain climbers. And thanks to the cooperation of 100 heroes, the trails were quickly opened. Fela told the merchant that she had heard about it too. In order for people to cross the mountains, one of the heroes built a trail here. There was also a tract in the mountains. Most of the systems they used were made by Ison's disciples, and they helped them a lot. It became clear to Ison that his boys were doing their best. The result of his students' labors was directly related to everyday life, and he was glad that they had chosen such a path. Suddenly, the hero noticed demons ahead and alerted the merchant. He warned that there were about 4 lizardmen ahead. Ro didn't see them and wanted to know where they were. The lad pointed ahead and said they were in the distance. Ro then took his binoculars to make sure. Ison turned out to be right. At this distance they were clearly visible despite the coloring, and there were indeed 4 of them. It looked like they had adapted, but it was simply impossible not to notice them. Ison knew they were violent and asked Ro if they really attacked people. Maybe not often, but Ro had seen a few advertisements for attacks on merchants. At least there were no announcements of friendship with them. Rina thought there was something wrong with them and asked the teacher about it. It was as if they were wearing miasmas. Ro took another look through the binoculars and verified that there were indeed miasmas on their paws. The hero speculated that they had probably tasted the flesh of a demon, hence the rage, and if they left them, they would surely attack someone. Ison smiled at Ro and told him that now was the right time to deal with them. The merchant wanted to be sure of Ison's decision. The hero replied that it was dangerous to leave them wandering along the road. Ison asked them to stop the wagon as they approached them. When the cart stopped, the hero jumped out of it and headed towards the lizards. The girls wanted to go along with the teacher and jumped off the wagon too. Ison didn't mind and told the girls that they would go together. The hero was surprised that they came as close as possible, but the lizards didn't even notice them and didn't attack. Their attention was on the little fox that was scared and burning with flames. Judging from its flames, Rin assumed it was a fire fox. This creature was something like a demon, but he was still just a baby. A huge lizard, compared to the fox, kicked it with its foot and the fox flew backwards. Despite the bloody wound in his side, the frightened fox managed to stay on his feet. The lizards kept their eyes on their prey and bloodily choked on their saliva. Rin glumly assumed that showdowns between demons were the order of the day. Isin confirmed it, but there was something wrong here. The thing was that hunting wasn't part of the stages of growing up. These lizards were clearly bullying the fox. Such behavior must have been caused by the demon's influence on their minds. The hero realized that there was definitely something wrong here. He asked the lizards to stop and the beasts turned their heads in his direction. Isin tried to explain to them that they had eaten the demon's flesh and were now under the influence of the miasmas that hovered around them. The hero speculated that there could have been another reason, but it was clearly apparent to him that he would not be able to ask them about it. The lizards weren't going to answer him, and the hero had no other choice. Instead of talking, the beasts pounced on the Iceman. The guy coldly glared at the lizards and warned that he would kill them. The two lizards on the sides were quickly defeated. The girls quickly dealt with them and the hero took up his sword. They told the master that they had dealt with them and Isin understood. With one swing, he dismembered the remaining two lizards and told his apprentices that he was done with them as well. Just in case, they should have been on guard and Rin stayed alert. Fela meanwhile decided to look around to see if anyone else had miasmas. Even though the hero couldn't feel them, it was still best to look around. A merchant's carriage pulled up to them, who praised the boys for their excellent work. Ro remarked that Mr. Isin was very good with a sword, but the hero replied that their movements were too predictable. Besides, at the moment, he was most concerned about that wounded fox cub. The little fox tried to get to his feet, but he couldn't do it very well. Apparently, he was seriously injured. The hero saw this very well, so he decided to help heal him. He took a step towards the fox cub, but the beast took a defensive stance. His fur was covered in fire again from fear, and he was clearly ready for battle. Ro suggested that he should not have been touched. Isin replied that it was peculiar for such foxes to burst into flames in the heat of emotion. The adults were capable of burning down an entire house. Even though it was still a baby fox, they wouldn't be able to get close to it. It was like that. But in that case, a starvation death would await him. The hero inquired if Ro had a recovery potion. The lad replied that he had all of those lying around in his wagon, but they were meant for humans and unicorns, and he didn't think they were worth giving to the fox. There are effective and ineffective ingredients for every demon, but there are some that will be overkill. But the hero saw which ones would fit exactly and asked for a potion to be served to him. Ro took 2 bottles from the crate and held them out to Isin. The merchant had prepared them especially for the trip. The hero smiled and said that it was clear at a glance that they were of good quality. Ro replied that he bought them from a good place and asked how they would use them. As usual, Isin was going to talk a bit with these medicines. Ro stared at Isin in surprise, not realizing how this was possible. The hero took the recovery potions in his hands and asked them to help this little guy. The potion bottles that Isin held glowed. First, it was necessary to find out about their ingredients and if they could help the fox cub. Ro wanted to make sure that the hero was actually talking to them. Isin smiled and handed one of the bottles to the merchant, saying that it was for humans. Isin kept the second bottle for himself. Inside was a potion with blue belladonna and lake onion. He wondered if the potion could come out. With a single request from him, the bottle foamed up and the cap flew off like champagne. Ro was surprised that it had a change in color as well as the composition of its magic power. Isin confirmed it and said that the potion now had a delicate texture. Something that was created to heal others with its determination was truly a good potion. Isin thanked the potion for helping them and now the fox cub would be fine. Now was a good time to apply the cure to the fox cub and the boy carefully made his way towards the beast. Ro noticed that this fox cub was still cautious and the bleeding was only getting worse. He didn't understand how the Isin was going to approach it. Isin just picked up the surprised fox in his arms and Ro became worried. He called out to Isin, but the hero said it was fine. The hero smiled even though the fox was lashing out as hard as it could and surrounded Isin with his flame. The guy told the fox that he would be fine, so he shouldn't have worried. The fox cub looked questioningly at the hero and calmed down a bit. The guy in the burned out clothes petted the puzzled little guy and said he was good. Ro tried to point out the fire to the hero. Isin asked him not to worry as he was protected. Besides, he asked him to take a potion and cure that fox cub instead. Ro held out the potion to the hero and Isin slowly and carefully poured the contents onto the baby. The merchant was surprised that the fox cub's wound began to heal immediately. He hadn't realized that human potions were so effective, but this was straight up next level. Ro wanted to know from Iseness how he did something like this. The guy replied that he made this potion by accident. He just combined ingredients that would be suitable for fire foxes. Isen smiled and said that it was amazing who made the medicine itself. It made sense to Ro, but he suggested that it was impossible to make such a thing without knowing what was effective for foxes. The hero explained that he had once had the honor of treating with the apprentices of a demonic beast lord. Ro exclaimed that it was amazing, and he didn't even know Isen could do such a thing. But the hero asked him not to praise him like that, for he was far from being a professional. He offered to look at the animal's skin, which was completely unharmed. The fox looked at its back in surprise and snorted. The hero realized that the animal was surprised that his wound had healed so quickly. He was curious about the pattern on his back. The hero speculated that it might have been the wound, and decided to bandage it just in case. When Isen was done with the bandaging, he let the surprised fox cub go free. The surprised fox realized he could stand and jumped around in a circle. The kid smiled and Ro seemed pleased. The trader wanted to make sure that Isen really didn't get burned. The hero looked at his clothes and said that they were a little burnt, but there were no wounds. There was magic on it that protected his body. Ro offered to change those clothes to other clothes since they were burnt, but the hero replied that it was no big deal. Besides, his clothes would regenerate in time. Ro assumed that the magic was activated by the state of the clothes and could only be felt while they were recovering. The hero was surprised that the merchant got it right. One of his students has an alliance of artisans and his friends there made such clothes. The apprentice told him that the teacher did not take much care of his clothes and since he had left them behind. The apprentice made this gift and asked him to wear it. This was complicated and expensive magic. This was to be expected from the equipment of the prophet Isen himself. Isen looked questioningly at the fox cub that somehow ended up on his shoulder. The fox crouched on his arm and licked his burnt glove. Isen thanked him and told him not to worry about fixing it himself. Fela and Rin greeted the master cheerfully. Rin said they looked around and everything was safe. The hero thanked the apprentices for their help and motioned for them to climb back into the wagon. He let the fox go and offered to take him back home. As the group headed back to the wagon, the fox cuddled around the kid's leg and Isen stopped. He looked at the little guy with a smile and asked what was wrong. Rin glanced at the fox and Fela said with certainty that he was theirs now. The Fela thought he had their scent on him. The hero leaned over to the fox and asked what he was supposed to do for him. The fox pounced on the Iceman again and the hero realized that he wanted to go with them. Fela recalled how the hero had picked them up just like that too. Isin immediately warned the fox that they were headed for the city. The fox snorted and it seemed to Rinna that he was apparently trying to say something. It looked like his home was that way, but he was scared so he wanted to be with them. The hero asked the merchant if they could take him to the magic city and Ro was fine with it. He was not a ferocious beast and would be easy to handle in case of anything. Ro also said that his fellow unicorn was also a demonic beast. In that case, it was settled, and the hero invited the joyful fox to come along with them. After a while, the protagonists arrived at a magical city called Strata. At the entrance to the city, Ro warned Iceman that they had arrived and asked where his fire fox was. The fox ended up not going in to get away from them and hid behind Isen's clothes. Rin noticed that this fox liked it on his chest. Fela smiled and said she understood, for it was always cozier next to his heart. Ro suggested they go to the town hall. He pointed his finger forward and said it was the building at the end of the alley. Isen suggested that they would have to go through formalities and Ro agreed with him. They had to get permission to leave the demonic beast. In addition, it was possible to gather information to search for the mayor of the trading city. Isen needed to hand over the deputy's letter as soon as possible. Their carriage headed down the main road towards the town hall. It was quite crowded and many wagons passed by them. Isen said that such a lively, beautiful town was as good as a trading town. As was clear from the name, magic was used to develop the city. It was also used in cooking in the magic kitchens. They cooked over high heat. Frozen pastries were also quite popular, which Ro offered to show them later. Isen smiled and remarked that the place was pretty good. Rin told the master that she wanted to eat and saliva flowed from her mouth. She was already eager to taste the various dishes they could encounter here. Their wagon reached the town hall of the magic city. Ro came out to the guys at the town hall and apologized for keeping them waiting. He took care of the wagon and luggage. The hero noticed that the staff was in a hurry to get somewhere and it bothered Fela as well. Ro replied that when he visited this place, it used to be quieter. He decided to apply for permission to keep the beast demon for now. The application for both beasts ended up being accepted after a while, and it was quite fast. It wasn't quite like the people here were busy. While Ro was talking to the heroes, a passing girl paid attention to them. She recognized Ru in the crowd and came over to say hello to him. Ro recognized Melissa, who apparently had also arrived in this town. The girl fixed her hair and said that she was the secretary to the mayor of the trading city. She also recognized Fela, who was next to him. But Melissa noticed that her aura had changed somehow. Fela waved her hand to the girl happily. Ro thought that before she met Isekai'd, Fela had been rather cold. Melissa assumed that something had happened and asked the girl about it. Ro wanted to introduce Melissa to the people who wanted to visit the mayor of the market town. He introduced her to Rin and Isekai'd, who were delighted to meet them. The girl asked to be called Melissa the secretary and asked what business they had with the mayor. The hero handed the girl a letter and said it was from the deputy. Melissa noticed that on this letter was her magic mark. She asked for permission to check it, and the hero didn't mind since she was the secretary. Melissa thanked her, but didn't want to just stand around chatting, and offered to have a cup of tea. As the girl read the letter, Ro noticed that she had exactly the same reaction as he did. Isekai'd remembered that the letter had mentioned him as a prophet. The girl wanted to make sure that the content of the letter was true and asked Ro about it. The merchant replied that it was all true and asked that the information be kept secret. Melissa looked at the girls and said she understood. So there was nothing strange about the changed behavior of the Fela. Meanwhile, Fela was showing Rin how she made the flowers in the teapot bloom. Rin looked at the flowers with delight and said that it was quite interesting. Melissa understood and put the contents of the envelope back. She hoped they would give the mayor the letter, and Isekai'd wanted to make sure everything was in order. Melissa replied that everything was fine and she would act as a mediator. Their meeting was just about to adjourn, but a voice from behind Melissa said it wasn't necessary. Melissa and the others turned their heads and saw a girl with disheveled hair in front of them. The beastman with ears and a tail introduced herself as the mayor of a trading town named Natte. She looked at Isekai'd and said she was here to see a teacher. The guy smiled and asked his student how she was doing. Natte replied that she was doing well and that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. She felt better now than she had ever felt before. Even though she was acting quite serious, her tail was unknowingly wagging like a joyful dog. Melissa thought it was funny and suppressed her laughter. The hero smiled and thought that showing emotion through her tail was peculiar to her species. Fela approached Natte and noticed that she looked the same as before. The mayor of the city recognized Fela. She wasn't very friendly to her and said that Fela as always didn't have an ounce of modesty in front of her teacher. But when she was in charge of the theater group, she was similar to her. The girl laughed and said that she had changed just because she left that post. Things might have turned out differently if it wasn't for her teacher. Natte didn't understand why they came to this town together and said she was jealous. Fela noticed that Natte was as straightforward as usual, but they had their reasons. She asked for permission to introduce her to Rin. Rin greeted the town mayor and Natte apparently recognized her. She realized that this was the same Rin who had answered the teacher's letters. The girl replied that everything was correct and once again introduced herself by her full name. Fela said that their first meeting was also in a trading town and she turned out to be a wonderful person and sister. In that case, Natte said that her friends were also her friends, so she was happy to meet Rin. She asked to call her simply by her first name or sister as she wished. Rin agreed and told Natte it was her pleasure to meet her. From the outside, the hero noticed that Fela and Natte were similar to each other and it was easy for Rin to get along with them. Isekai'd held out a letter to his apprentice and said that he had come here to deliver it. The girl instantly approached the hero and thanked her teacher. It seemed to the boy that she had become more abrupt. When the girl finished reading the letter, she thanked him for coming all this way for the report. But the hero didn't see it as a big deal, because he was traveling the world and just stopped by on his way. Natte admitted that she envied the girls who traveled with him. Natte asked Melissa what the term of office for mayor was. Melissa said with a smile that she still had a few years to go, and she should have given up on it for now. The mayor hesitated and said that in that case she would continue to look for all kinds of loopholes. Isekai'd didn't understand how it was that she had come to them before Melissa let them know about them. Natte pointed her finger up and said that she had a meeting going on the roof. She saw the teacher in the wagon as they drove through the archway at the entrance to town. In an effort to calm herself down, she equalized her breathing so that she held her breath a little longer as she made her way towards them. It was an awful long way from the gate and Rin didn't understand how she could have noticed them. But that was exactly what Isekai'd expected from a sniper archer who had sharp eyes. Natte clenched her fist to restrain herself. She admitted that she hadn't heard such a thing in a long time. However, the teacher was still not her equal, and she was going to train hard. Judging from how fast her tail was wagging, she was very satisfied. Melissa assumed that the city mayor took a break in the middle of the meeting because of Isekai'd's arrival. Isin was also concerned and thought they had distracted her from her business. But Lynette calmed them down and said that the time was getting close to break time as it was. Also because of this break she was energized, so now things would be even more productive. Lynette was glad that the heroes stopped by to visit them. But Isin thought it was a little strange that their meeting was taking place on a rooftop. He assumed it was just a normal magical city. It turned out that the unexpected had happened and they needed to talk in a place where they could see the city and the surrounding area. The hero assumed that this was the reason they stayed in the magic city, and the mayor confirmed his guess. Lynette stated that the situation jeopardized the existence of the entire town. The girl told the hero about survival. Isin was worried about her telling him about their emergency because he wasn't sure if she, as the mayor of the town, could divulge it. The girl nodded her head and said that she didn't want to bother the teacher, but they would appreciate it if he would help them. It became clear to the hero and he asked for the girl's opinions. Rin and Fela gladly agreed to help them. Ro also volunteered to help them since he had many business partners and branches with his friends. They would surely be happy to help them. When everything was settled, the hero asked the Lynette to tell them a little more. In that case, the girl suggested that they go to the roof. It would be more convincing if they talked to the other heads of the city as well. Lynette looked at Melissa, who was silently listening to them. Melissa understood without words and focused on her magic. She explained the situation to them using telepathy, and they gave them permission. The mayor of the city could invite Isis and the others to the meeting. The hero realized that this girl could negotiate by telepathy. She was only a secretary, but she was quite skillful. Melissa asked to follow her and led the protagonists to the roof. On the roof, they were met by other important representatives of the cities. They recognized the great hero Isin, who had come here with his students. They were honored to meet them. The young guy introduced himself as the head of the magical city named Shard. Everything they talked about had already been conveyed to them and he appreciated their cooperation. Isin smiled and said that he was also pleased to meet them. He still didn't know anything and asked for an explanation of the whole situation. Shard smiled and invited them to the table as it was a long story. When everyone was seated, the guy explained that it started not too long ago. He noticed that a pillar of fire had risen from a volcano in the east, Mount Madar. Shard pointed the boys to the mountains in the distance, which were clearly visible from this rooftop. Fela suggested that those mountains were hikers. Shard replied that it was an active volcano, so it was quite possible. However, no ash was visible. As for the investigation, the reason for what happened was related to the mistress of these mountains, Empress Isekai'd. That is what they thought. Rin was surprised by this story, for she didn't know that the mistress of the mountain really existed. This demon was already many years old, and she had a long history of neighboring the magic city. Ro confirmed the Shard's words. He heard that thanks to her, the number of other demons in the mountains did not increase. The Empress appeared to have a mind, and she knew their language. The Shard was confident that she would not harm the humans. Even in his generation, the relationship between the city and her was excellent. As Isin assumed, recently something had changed and the Shard agreed. The pillar of fire was the Empress magic, which was very similar to Kitsunebai. When the explorers went to the mountain, a certain voice in the middle of the path asked them not to approach. According to the people, this voice was full of anger. The people felt the fever and danger rising and could not go any further. Isin wanted to know what happened after that. First of all, they forbade climbing the mountains, and it was the right decision. The pillars of fire arising day by day intensify and burn the surface of the mountain. They spill over the rocks, and there were times that scorched embers flew even into the city. The mountain has become dangerous and no one knows when the eruption will happen again. No one could reach the Empress mansion on the hillside. The situation was getting worse and worse as they could not meet her. Shard was even thinking that soon the lava would reach the city itself. There was a limit to how much magic they could suppress. Lynette picked up her bow and told the wizard that was why she had called them here. At this rate, it would become dangerous to be in the magic city. It became clear to the hero and he thought that she was a sniper again. The girl smiled, and Isin told her that she could hit a magic arrow from here right up to the mountain. Shard confirmed this and said that the arrow was imbued with freezing magic. If lava spread over the surface of the mountain, they would just freeze it. It was also possible to shoot down the embers if one shot with high accuracy. Isin was impressed by this, but it was no surprise to him that the Lynette was able to do this. Distance was not a problem for the Lynette, but with rocks and lava it was already more complicated. If the need arose, they would use homing arrows. The Empress would unleash her anger on people and they would use soporific or sedative arrows. In the worst case scenario, they would release the ones that could kill her. That is why they are all gathered here. Isen realized that they wanted to discuss all the possibilities. The fact was that the people of the city didn't want to attack the empress. The hero realized that the empress was angry and offered to talk to her. The fact is that Lynette sent arrows with messages to the mountainside, but there was no response. Isen asked if she could really read. It was possible to understand how closely she communicated with people. However, the city officials tried to deal with her anger. Day and night, people tried their best since many people liked the empress. The mayor of the city replied that killing the empress was the last thing they wanted. The hero smiled and told the Lynette that she was doing the right thing. She was protecting this city, and apparently her abilities had not deteriorated at all. Lynette replied that everything was right. After all, it was one of the skills that the teacher liked, and that was why she practiced. The girl wagged her tail when the teacher praised her words and asked her to stroke her head. Restraining herself as best she could, the Lynette approached the hero and said that she would like him to pet her when they were done with the case. That would be a good motivation for her. She wanted to get the teacher's opinions if he was okay with it. She reminded him of Fela in some ways, and the hero agreed with her. Even if they weren't done yet, he didn't mind petting her. Isen got up from his chair and stroked the girl's head. Melissa smiled again as the Lynette's tail wagged frantically in different directions. The people that were on the rooftop were seeing the mayor like this for the first time. Fela smiled and said that all this was happening, moreover, in front of the secretary. It was surprising to Rin that Lynette expressed her emotions directly and always said what she wanted to say. It was difficult for Rin to catch her facial expression, and she was not verbose in the letter. Her letters were pretty neat, but the Fela liked that. She told Rinna that they could get the most out of her. Lynette said that was awesome, and now she was full of motivation. Isen was happy for her, and the girl apologized for asking to pet her. She wanted to know about the hero's decision. Isen decided that it would be best to start by asking the empress herself, and if they were lucky, he would do so. Everyone present was shocked. They didn't understand how Isen would approach the mountain where it was quite dangerous. The hero said that he would not act rashly without knowing anything, for it was dangerous. To begin with, he suggested that they walk around a bit and then go back. Shard noticed a small fox peeking out of Iceman's clothes and asked who it was. The hero said they had saved him from demons on the way to town. Perhaps that's why he was so shy and hadn't shown his face until now. The fox cub was wary, and the hero wanted to know what was wrong. The fox looked toward the mountains. The hero speculated that he might have seen something, and perhaps that was where his home in the mountains was. The fox snorted warily. The hero told him that it would be dangerous, but he wanted to take a chance. He wanted to know if there was a reason not to go there, and told the Shard that he would go to the mountains. The hero wanted to see the state of the Empress and that kid's house. Shard wanted to make sure of his confidence and agreed with him. Thus, they formed a group of explorers again, and Shard hoped that he could accompany them on their journey. The hero was perfectly fine with that, especially since the Shard would be able to help them in many ways. The Shard was happy to hear that and said he would do what he could. He was grateful that the hero had ventured on such a dangerous adventure. Shard wanted to avoid attacking the Empress, so he suggested that they cooperate. Isen didn't mind and agreed to his proposal. After talking, their group set off on their journey.